Alrighty, let's see if I'm up and going. I think I got it to start a little early. So, as usual, just let me know if I'm visible and audible, and then we'll just get started chatting and such. Hopefully, people will get the notification and start to kind of filter in. I think we've got some people here already. So, let's see if I can make sure that I've got people in here. Aha! Everybody's starting to filter in. Awesome. Okay. Yes. I wanted to do a just something for hitting the 10,000 subscriber mark, and I've been meaning to do some more streams anyway. And so I figured now was at least a time where I had a couple hours, so I had just enough time to kind of throw myself together, and just figured I'd do a channel chat. Nothing really planned. So behind me, I just have some stuff I'm working on in terms of stuff I've reviewed and or working on reviews, and then some of the disc of the year candidates because I'm working on getting my 2024 awards done. I try to get them done at least before the Oscars are done. So at least as long as I get them out in February, I feel pretty decent that I'm not too far. 4Ks here. Renan, Pelvin, Uncarded Reviews, Albert, thanks everybody, Matthew, King Fam, just delightful. Welcome everybody. Again, nothing really planned. Just wanted to chat for a while since I hit a milestone I never thought I would hit. I was completely flabbergasted when I hit the first 1,000, and then 3,005, and I thought six was major, and then it just kept going. So it's amazing that I've gotten to this point with my super nerdy videos. Uh, Kevin's here. Hey, stream of consciousness. Yes. I know some channels do these all the time. I have been meaning to do more live streams, but it's hard to find the time, and the you have to at least have some amount of energy, and especially after a work day, that's really difficult. So I am going to try to at least do some of these more often. So again, it's a fantastic time, of course, for physical media because everybody seems to be on overdrive in terms of their releases. And I don't know about you guys, it's really hard to try and keep up with not just the releases here in the US, but all the boutique labels in the UK, and then all the other labels throughout Europe, and of course Imprint in Australia. And it seems like we're on kind of overdrive. So it's great that we're seeing tons of releases. The trouble is, of course, that means further backups at the disk replication plants and such. So it's great, but also doesn't necessarily mean all of that is great. So it would be great, of course, if this could spur the rest of the industry to kind of match that. But it's at least nice we're in a sort of unseen realm of physical media collecting in terms of we have all these amazing options, but my wallet cannot keep up with the so I try just like everybody else. I'm scrimping and saving and couponing where possible, just anything to try and afford stuff. Let's see. Dun, dun, dun. Yeah, I have really enjoyed the channel Discord. If anybody wasn't aware, I have a basic free Discord for the channel. If you're interested, that's where I can post some just transfer thoughts and film thoughts and stuff more real time. So I've really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed the platform. It's pretty fun, and I like how it's got a sort of no frills aesthetic. So if anyone's interested, that's where I usually can be found, and will be able to just post little things here and there while I'm reviewing a disc and I run into something, or generate some further film geek discussions. Chronicles here. Hey man, let's see. Justin says, "Did you hear about the Plan Pictures is putting out the Peck and Bus West box?" Yeah, I just kind of found out about that after putting out the the Garrett review that I spent way too long on and trying to prepare and do. But I wished I'd known some about it beforehand. But actually, it does have involvement from Mike Siegel, and I know he just posted this morning that he did get to look at the discs, and apparently, what it looks like is for Pat Garrett, they were able to have both preview cuts on there, or at least the Turner Master and the second preview cut. But they basically did what I kind of suggested in my video and kind of what I wanted to do of basically, I guess they weren't given access to Warner's print or interpositive or whatever their source is for the Turner Master. And so they basically took the new 4K restoration master, like I suggested and what I kind of wanted to do, used that as a base and then jumped over to the preview cut specific footage. And I guess on the second preview, that means they were using the Criterion print scan, but may have done additional cleanup work themselves. And then for the Turner Master, they were unfortunately stuck using that standard definition source, I guess, but what we see on the DVD. So it's basically it seems like they did what the team and on the German release of the Alamo did, where they had to use the MGM new master of the general release version, and then for the 70 millimeter roadshow specific scenes, they had to actually go back to the Laserdisc master and then upscale those. So you have that quality jump, but they're the only ones who did it. So that plus the Mike Siegel extras for that box set make it really appealing. It's also I want to say it's like 120 euros, and I'm not sure if there's an easy way to import releases from that label, because I did look around and I don't think any of the usual sort of import sites have uh that or carry that label or carrying that box set as of yet. So I'm not sure how easy it would be to get here in the US or how expensive it's going to be. So I'm just really happy. It looks like somebody has put in some real effort, and frankly, that's the effort we should have seen on the Criterion release. But I'm happy that somebody has done it at least. So that was just a complete surprise because I hadn't heard about that set until literally like a day or two ago, and then I've been just scouring around and I read through the whole forum thread on it, and I'm kind of like, well, even if it's just a minor improvement or getting a version out there in the HD realm, at least somebody's doing it. Let's see. Tyler asking about about the La La Land Moonraker. Yeah, I had to get that in here. I'm going to do reviews of both Golden Gun and Moonraker, which are both head explode, and then I've got License to Kill coming in the mail, and that was amazing that they announced it so relatively quickly after the other two. So I hope that means we'll see more of the bond scores. I mean, I know we probably will, but I mean, in terms of more quickly, because that's that's great. We've been waiting for so long. Just getting one was like whoa. Getting two, but three in rapid succession. It's like there haven't been this many since the 2003 remaster project. Let's see. Here's the same polo shirt for the next 10K subs. Yeah. Thanks, Matty Preacher. Yeah, I don't know if everybody gets it. I thought it would be just a sort of goofy joke to just have a black polo shirt on as a sort of unofficial uniform, because I could never think of what shirt to wear in a video, and I don't have a closet full of really cool film T-shirts and stuff. And I thought it would get really old wearing the same handful of shirts. So then it just dawned on me. I'm like, well, what if I had a sort of film geek uniform? What would I wear? And I thought of my different working in theater experiences and what you have as a sort of basic theater uniform nowadays, and or just being the video store clerk. And I'm like, well, wouldn't they just have like a black polo shirt? And then that's how I hit upon it. So I have several different black polo shirts that I cycle through, but for whatever reason, some people seem to think I just have one black shirt and just wear it and never wash it. It's like, no, I've got quite a number of them by this point, and I do wash them every time. So it helped figure out what I it helped solve one problem in terms of the I don't know what shirt to wear when I make videos. But then it also created another problem of I keep buying black polo shirts and washing them over and over. Let's see. Can't wait to receive the Dollars Trilogy Arrow UHDs, knowing that you contributed some part to them. Yeah, that was a something I didn't expect. I only know bits and pieces, but basically, I kind of heard they might be working on some sort of project, and they kind of teased a few things, and so basically, I just sent emails and did like Hail Mary emails sort of, just saying, "Hi, I'm a super geek. If you don't mind, I can just literally I have lots of research and audio captures. So if you need anything, I'm here." That's basically how it kind of went. So I just know a few little bits of information that I could kind of glean and have just helped out where I could, just as like a very far out there extra contributor. So I just was amazed that they answered my email. So basically, it was one of those things where I was like, "Well, I don't expect anything to come out of this, but if I can do anything or help in any way, I would like to be able to say that I tried." So, I'm just amazed that they were able to get the rights and put this together and do something, and, it was hard not to want to just shout it from the rooftops when I figured this stuff out, but, I'm glad it's out there now in terms of the announcement and news, and that I'm sure they're going to be very successful. And my hope is that they will be successful enough to hopefully allow the other Leone films to get more research and more work done to them. And I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that they'll be able to do Sucker and put the same level of research into it, because if the Dollars trilogy needed restoration and research, Sucker needs like 10 times that, because that film has always been cursed and kicked around. Let's see. 4K's got the UHD of Cruising coming in from Arrow. Yeah, that's one of that's got to be probably the first major Friedkin title that's now able to be redone without potential Friedkinizing. So I don't know how much of his catalog we're going to see get that treatment, but I do think that's the first of several that we're likely going to see, that will now have an opportunity to get something out there that doesn't necessarily have all of his changes and transfer elements and quirks that he preferred. Will you be working with Arrow on future projects? That I wish I could say yes or no. I just have no idea. The way this kind of stuff works, it's just kind of right place, right time, and if you can help a little or something, then it's kind of a gray area when it comes to physical media and releasing, and labels now doing more and more restoration work. I think it's easier for labels as a third party to work with outside contributors or fan historians or fans with a lot of research, as opposed to a major studio. So it seems to be just kind of one of those things where if everything lines up, it's like a lot of the Hong Kong and martial arts films released by Eureka and Arrow and others that have audio tracks or certain elements that were generated due to fans having years of research and being able to put their 2 cents in and say, well, you can do that with this master, but here's this audio track I found on a Taiwanese laser disc that's actually the original audio, and here's the subtitle track I cobbled back together. So it just seems to be one of those things where if everything lines up, then there's some of us out here who are more than willing to help out in any way possible. Let's see. Do you think Arrow might get Pat Garrett? Yeah, do you think Arrow might get Pat Garrett at some point in the future? That would be really great because I was very impressed and happy with their Major Dundee release. Criterion, I think, usually tries to keep the UK rights now that they have a British distribution arm, but they don't do that for everything. So I don't know. I guess it would just depend on if they were doing the UK rights or they had planned that. But since Arrow now has a Warner relationship and has released some Warner titles, it's very possible. It just depends on if Criterion wanted the UK rights or not. Let's see. Are you into any Taylor Sheridan films, particularly Sicario, Hell or High Water, Wind River? Um, Sort of. I saw Sicario and Hell or High Water back when they came out, but I should probably revisit them. Let's see. Do you think they'll do a Dollars trilogy box? I'm not sure actually because I was kind of interested that of course I don't know any of this stuff. I just had to put two and two together, but when they announced it and that there are these staggered individual releases, I that was kind of surprising because I thought they were going to do a box set. So I think it's partly that they wanted to do limited editions and that the amount of work in each film was a little bit different. So I think some are just taking a little bit longer than others, and that probably may be why they've staggered them out. But they could do a box set afterwards. That's not unheard of. For example, they did it on the Roger Corman Poe films. They released those as Blu-rays, and then eventually they made that Six Gothic Tales box set after we most of us had already bought the individual ones, and then the box set went out of print. And I was like, well, dang it, I would have gotten the box set afterwards, but it, it's a maybe, I guess. I think they'll probably just try and see how fast these sell out because they're gonna sell out. And I don't think there's a question of that. And then when they figure out the standard editions, maybe they'll do a box set. But we'll just have to wait and see. Let's see. Will the spy who loved me get a proper 4K scan? Oh boy, I have no idea what the situation is going to be with the purported Warner UHDs of just the Connery films that we're supposed to be possibly getting in a few months as part of the Warner 2025 cycle. If that is the case, I'm sure we'll probably see the Moore era probably, I would assume, within the next year of releasing. That's probably how they would stagger it out. Also, because it's a lot of films, but they would probably do the Connery era first, then they would probably do the Moore era, and we'd have to wait for the rest of the original 20 to sort of eke out. Um, then maybe they might do a whole box set, but I have no idea what those are going to turn out like. I don't know if they're going to be all newer masters. I don't know if they're going to be a mix of new and old. I don't know if they're going to be trying to completely use pre-existing materials and then the audio is a whole other there's no telling what it's going to turn out like. So yeah, that's going to be interesting to say the least. Let's see. What do you hope the packaging on the upcoming Connery set will be? Well, it's Warner, so I assume it's going to be pretty generic. I don't know if they're going to go for a big elaborate box. They usually don't do that. They usually only do the boxes in Europe for catalog titles. So I assume it's going to be something relatively on the generic side. Let's see. Have you ever done a video essay on spaghetti westerns? I read Alex Cox's book on the genre years ago, and it made me appreciate some of the lesser known titles. Yeah, Jeffrey, I want to say I've read his that particular book. I remember, I think I did, and I think I remember enjoying it. And of course, I love it whenever he talks about any of the genre films, and his commentaries are usually rewarding for that particular film. And I love that he has such an adoration of the genre. Um, I've never done a video essay in particular. I usually just focus on a specific film when I'm talking about the disc release, so that way I can focus entirely on that one individual film. But that's not a bad idea because there's so many that it's hard to even think you've seen half of them when you look at the just the sheer number that was made within a certain period of time. Let's see. Now Arrow has to fix Billy the Kid. Just send Arrow your review of it. They'll let you work on it. It would be nice if I could use some of these as like a calling card or something. Be like, hi, I will just knock it on your door. I'll do you need somebody to work on stuff? Just so you know, I might ask for revisions and redos if I find stuff. And that's the other thing. I do get a lot that some people think that I go looking for problems. I don't. I don't go looking for problems. It's just when I notice things, and then if I'm reviewing something, then I'm already taking notes, and then I'm taking more notes and more notes, and it's like I'm not looking for this stuff. It's just I find one thing and then another and another, and I sometimes I just want to sit down and watch something, and I'm hoping I don't run into something. And sometimes I get pretty close, or sometimes I don't find anything major, or sometimes I get almost all the way to the end of the film, and then there's one frozen grain halo, and I'm like, "Oh, doggone it. You were so close. Why?" Um, but yeah, that's something that I do kinda chuckle at sometimes because I know I talk about issues, but these are important, you know? It's like if I find stuff, then I'm gonna say something. That's kind of part of the job, although this isn't really a job, obviously. Let's see. The Lowry masters for the Connery films is what worries me for 4K. Yeah, that's well, at least we know there are 4K masters of a certain vintage since they all turned up on streaming and they are better than the Lowry materials, but it remains to be seen if we're going to make it 100% away from all the Lowry materials. Fred says, "Why is getting the original audio for these films such a problem? Audio takes up comparatively less space than video. It's not a storage issue." Yep, you are preaching to the choir there. I will. Nowadays, if we can even get original audio, then the problem becomes: is the quality any good? Because quite frequently we will get original audio, and sometimes after decades absence, and then you look or listen to the original audio track, and the fidelity is compromised, the dynamic range has been reduced, it has processing it didn't need, it has noise reduction, or it hasn't been restored at all, or sometimes it hasn't been restored but they did do noise reduction. Unfortunately, there are examples of that behind me that will be discussed in the reviews. Not pointing any fingers. I couldn't resist. It's kind of why they're off by themselves in a way. Um, as usual, I always kind of struggle with, especially when I'm doing one of these live streams and I don't have a set topic. I know you guys know I like to put something related behind me, and I spend way too long trying to make like a little display or something. But this was just basically, I was like, well, I guess I'll do stuff I'm working on reviews and stuff that's going to be in the 2024 awards. So that's what this particular display is. Let's see. Wish Arrow got the Wild Bunch instead after the Billy the Kid debacle. Yeah. If Criterion does indeed have the Wild Bunch, it's gonna be interesting. It's definitely gonna be better than the Warner Blu-ray because, for my money, that's one of the worst Blu-rays Warner ever released because it was outdated when it came out. It was based on the DVD master. It's got grain reduction. The color is kind of iffy. It's got the 5.1 remix. It's a very early first generation Warner Blu-ray based on an HD DVD encode. It's like that needed to be upgraded at least a decade ago, and we still haven't gotten it. The Searchers was in a similar sort of state, but at least the Blu-ray of the Searchers was actually well made for the time and tried to quickly fix the color problems of the 2006 DVD master it was using. And if you look at that Blu-ray of The Searchers today in 2025, even upscaled, it's watchable. It's pretty darn impressive for one of Warner's earliest Blu-rays. But you switch over to the Blu-ray of The Wild Bunch, and you're like, what happened? Oh gosh. So basically anything's got to be an improvement. Although I should say that that German set of Peckinpah's westerns, while I guess it's still using the Blu-ray master of the Wild Bunch, Mike Siegel did put in a lot of new extras, which makes it really enticing. But apparently, he was able to source from a friend of his the actual European intermission and scan that, and I guess that's a branched version on there. So that is something I've always wanted to see in a new Wild Bunch release. So that's another reason why I have this crazy desire to like drop $150 on a German Peck and Pop box set because it's got the intermission card for the Wild Bunch. Let's see. Well, as usual, as soon as I go over to the chat, it jumps. So let me this is the fun you have when you do live streams on your own and you don't have stream managers and such. Let's see. Can you do a 4K Blu-ray review of the Lord of the Rings trilogy? Yeah, that would be a whole giant thing in and of itself because those films are stuck in Peter Jackson land, or I guess I should say they're stuck in early to mid 2000s digital intermediate land where all of those films kind of starting with the Phantom Menace are stuck in a particular form and resolution, and there's a variety of ways at coming at those and bringing them into the modern 4K realm. But the Peter Jackson films were done a particular way that kind of obviously rub a lot of us the wrong way, and yeah, it's I think they could be done better, or at least have what I would label, at least have something like a purist option or a best possible. This is how we made it back in 2003, and this is as good as we can get that translated. Just have that as on a separate disc, and that way you please everybody. But apparently, that would be asking for too much. But so, yeah, that would be an interesting review to do. I would have to dig into all of that more deeply and try to well it would obviously be a lot of technical discussions and then a lot of trying to figure out how a lot of the shots were originally finished. Let's see. What's the release schedule of upcoming reviews? That's a good question. Basically, as soon as I can get things finished and edited and uploaded, that's always my release schedule. I usually plan way too much and come up with too many ideas, and then it's trying to find the time to cram in research and recording videos and editing them and then uploading and all that stuff. But I do have, I would say, at least 4 or 5 different ones that are nearly done. So I'm hoping to get those out. The next 2 UHD reviews will be North by Northwest and The Searchers. I'm also reviewing the big Frank Capra Columbia box set. I've had to break that up. I've recorded the first section of the review, which is my normal length. I thought I would just, be able to at least cover some of the films and kind of break it up into maybe 2 videos. But since that set is 20 films, each one having different transfer elements to talk about, and some having supplements, some being new to UHD, and then having to talk about the box. I've recorded the first section on just the silence. So if that tells you, well, I've got one entire review video where I'm just talking about the first silence in that box set. So that's the other big project I'm working on. So hopefully that will be maybe 3 videos, possibly 4. I'm thinking to sort of try and split it up, and then in the last one kind of cover the box set itself and the very weird packaging, and then do like a summation. So I figured that would probably be a better way to cover it, because otherwise it would probably be like maybe a 4 hour long video if I was lucky once I edited it, and then trying to sit down and talk through all of that at once is maybe a bit much. So that's the other one that'll be just kind of sprinkled in through the next month. But yeah, North by Northwest, The Searchers, Demolition Man, those will be the next UHD reviews. And then I'll be doing The Great Escape and also the lovely Laurel and Hardy set, along with sprinkling in the Capper box set reviews and the La La Land CD reviews, and then also the best and worst of 2024 awards. Devin's here. Hey, man. Yes, as Devin points out, it's going to be the Italian extended and international cuts of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly on the upcoming Arrow release. So, as I've said before, they've really left no stone unturned. Let's see. Alex asks, De Palma or Man? It'd be De Palma for me. I enjoy films, but there's just something about De Palma, especially in how and how he's so geared more towards suspense sequences, and basically his visual style always just kind of grabs me more than Man does. It's just kind of more in my wheelhouse is probably the best way to put it. Thanks for the super chat, Port Film. Thanks for all the work taking film seriously. Thank you. Yeah. It's as always when people ask why I do this stuff, I just basically say, well, this is what I do anyway, and I just started making reviews because I could never find any reviews that went into this stuff, or I couldn't find the reviews that I wanted to read, so I just decided to start making them myself. Let's see. Zachary sends a super chat. Thanks, man. I know you're not a fan of the Craig Bonds, but what do you think of the IMAX scenes from No Time to Die being cropped to scope for home video or streaming? That's a pretty typical practice. It doesn't surprise me. I mean, I think most films usually, when they have the IMAX specific sequence, they don't get that retained. It's usually a rarity where you get at least a 178 version of the IMAX sequence retained in an otherwise scope master. I guess I don't even know how many films actually have their full IMAX 1.43 ratio within the home video master. I know that's even rarer to see than there's just having it a full 1.78 to fill the 16 by 9 screen. But yeah, it doesn't surprise me. I mean, and it's not like the Craig era doesn't have its share of aspect ratio quirks, because you could technically include a second version of Skyfall opened up because that film was shot digitally and it's been shown on HDTV and other places in like 178, and thus you have more picture information. It's obviously not how it's intended to be seen, but you could technically do that if so inclined, because it has been shown that way, I think. Let's see. Let me make sure because I always try to catch everybody, and then this chat jumps around. So, writes here. Thank you, man. Uh, Russell says, not really a movies thing, but the I Love Lucy Blu-ray is really fighting with True Lies for worst physical release. Yeah, that was unexpected, seeing AI upscaling pop up on I Love Lucy of all things, and Paramount was supposedly issuing corrected disc without it, but I don't know if it was for just that one particular shot, that moment that was spreading across the internet like wildfire, or if they were somehow addressing more. But yeah, it's unfortunate whenever it pops up. And then the Wallace and Gromit release happened where they did that to the Wallace and Gromit material, and that just was bizarre. That was a case of they should have just not bothered. They should have just done a new Blu-ray release and maybe spiffed up a thing or two, or done a new transfer or two, and that be it. Not everything has to be a UHD if you're not going to have the material that actually deserves a UHD, in terms of, if it's not really a 4K master, don't try and fake it, essentially. Let's see. Uh, did you see Eggers Nosferatu remake? I thought about it. I haven't. I guess I'll just wait and see what the actual disc release looks like, because I didn't get to see it in a Dolby Cinema near me because we only have two, and it was there, I think, but only for like a day, because unfortunately those seem to just change over like every weekend, and they usually share them because it's just one hall in the two theaters we have them. And basically, if I miss something there and it's a new release, I'd rather just wait and see it at home and get the UHD. So I think that's what I'm gonna do. 1975 was a good year for film, so I hope some good 50th anniversary releases are planned. Yeah, it's the same thing with the La La Land releases. That's how we're getting the Bond scores, is that they're sort of tied to anniversaries, and that's always a good thing to look for in terms of films, because usually the studios and rights holders, that's what gets it on their radar again, and they have a list of, coming up. We've got this that's coming up for an anniversary, and then we can do a relaunch, and thus the marketing team knows how to sell that. Steve asks, "Are you worried when they release the Connery UHDs that it'll spoil the movie, particularly when rear projection is so easily noticeable?" Well, you're going to run into, obviously, elements of the past that will be more noticeable because you've got such a dramatic visual quality in front of you in your house, and you're also sitting rather close to it. You're able to spot the seams a lot more than you would have, obviously, back in the day, watching something, or even as low tier as VHS on an old CRT, where that stuff wasn't visible. So I think there always has to be at least some suspension of disbelief, or some understanding of the era of the production. Personally, I've had never had an issue with rear projection in car scenes, unless it was badly done, where it was noticeable even in low quality viewings, because it just wasn't very well done to begin with, or it was very obvious. But even there, there's a certain charm to that, and I've never had an issue with it. But I get people not feeling the same way in the modern age. I just think that whoever is making certain decisions shouldn't try to reconform a film visually, or tweak or change elements to uh, try to avoid getting consumer complaints on like the Amazon page, or something. If anything, put in a note or make an extra that explains this stuff to hopefully get the viewing audience a bit more up to speed with the idea or the concept that, there are older techniques. They're not necessarily going to look all spiffy and shiny and brand new. So yeah, if we could get everybody a bit more educated on catalog titles and catalog title problems or inherent quirks, then that would help a lot more than them going in and messing with stuff. But they seem to just want to go in and mess with stuff instead. So hopefully that doesn't happen with the bonds, but there's never any telling with the bonds. You just they I have no idea what they're going to turn out like. Let's see. Brittany asks, first video I watched this year was one of the indie novel reviews. I love it when you talk about indie and pulp heroes. Thank you, Brittany. I try to focus on that because that's a particular genre that I have always enjoyed, but never really got into because it was such a niche thing. And then I discovered pulp reprints, and then I decided to finally track down all the indie novels, which took a while because unfortunately they're out of print and have been so for ages, and nobody talks about them, which is a shame because there's so much material in there. And now we have the wonderful fan translations of the German books, which have loads of fantastic material and interesting ideas. And it's like, no wonder the modern indie movies were horrible. They didn't. Nobody ever read these fantastic books, or these books with out there ideas that would have at least hopefully inspired the new films to do something better. Let's see. Ta-ta. I get the impression that things like compression are much more obvious to your eye than mine. It admittedly, once you start seeing this stuff, you can't unsee it. So I don't recommend people do the level of looking at transfers that I do, because you'll get to a point where you're stopping every 2 seconds and writing down timestamp notes, and that gets tedious very quickly. So it's unfortunately when I sit down and I just want to watch something, I kind of have to fight the urge to take transfer notes as much. But if I'm watching something that I know I'm going to specifically review, then I do take transfer notes, and then it may take 3 hours to watch a 2 hour movie. But then when I sit down just to watch something, I usually take transfer notes anyway because even if I'm not gonna review it at the time, I'm always like, "Well, I might need these later, or I might wanna remember something. Let me write down this note about the 3rd side of this particular laserdisc transfer having a weird moment or a really goofy break point or something." So, I'm usually writing transfer notes now for everything. Let's see. Chris is here. Hey, man. Favorite post-80s De Palma film that's not Carlito's Way or Mission Impossible? Well, you took my answer because my favorite De Palma film is Mission Impossible, actually. I know it's not a popular answer, but of course, I made so many videos just on MI1. It should be obvious that I'm kind of obsessed with that film and how it blends so many elements. And it's totally a De Palma movie while also being a studio movie, while also being a series movie. It's so many things in one that I just still find that film fascinating that it was able to do all of that. That yeah, as Fred points out, the 7 UHD, that's something I'm gonna have to tackle, because I mean, that film has always had transfers where Fincher has gone in and tried to do things, and so we're still stuck with it where the original Laserdisc master is the one that's the most hands off because they technically couldn't do a lot of the stuff that he wanted to do even back then. So that's one of those films where you just kind of have to look at every transfer and pick and choose. And I know it's going to be weird looking at that because in all the interviews he's talking about HDR in particular and how they were basically regrading shot by shot almost and trying to uh, be able to play around with things further. So while I understand the mentality and I'm glad that he was able to do what he wanted to do, I still think there should have been a separate version without all of the, so-called enhancements, but that didn't happen. So, yeah, that's definitely that's going to be a big review for me to tackle. Let's see. Matthew says Lowry already processed the opticals for Bond as detailed and licensed to restore. Yeah, the Lowry masters are a thing in and of themselves, and I still don't know for sure if the 4K streaming masters were completely without their involvement or any of those pieces. I want to say they were because they would have had to have started over from scratch, but it's we don't have any information. That's the trouble. Everything is just me having to guess. Let's see. Antonio says, "Congrats for 10,000 subscribers." Thanks, man. It's crazy that we're still dealing with loudness wars, dynamic range for compression, and noise reduction in the year of 2025. Unfortunately, those never end. Just when you think things are getting better, this is the same quiet problem that we audiophiles and cinephiles will rail about, and it's like nobody hears us, and they go right back to insisting on we need noise reduction. People are not hiss is evil, we must destroy hiss. It must be loud to grab people's attention. It's like, no, no, those are not correct. You don't have to do this stuff. But unfortunately, I once those issues really started taking off and the, so-called loudness wars in the 90s, that was kind of it. I don't think we're ever going to be rid of them. And it happens with virtually every film, but nobody looks at films. They may think about it in terms of music releases and audiophile discussions, which of course is great because that is a legitimate issue. But the same thing happens in film audio. And besides me and people here in this chat and in some fan restoration forums, outside of the core group of us who recognize this as a problem, nobody else does, and it's like it's the exact same problem. And when I'm finishing up these reviews, but both of these have the same problem where you've got mono tracks that were in need of restoration and did finally get put on these discs in lossless containers, but they don't sound the way they should. And on both of them, I had to resort to going to vintage pre-restoration VHS tapes to get the best source of the audio. And it's clearly this same source that's being used. I'm just like, at that point, it's like I feel like I've gone crazy because it's like, how is a pre-restoration tape from the '80s that I had to track down a better quality audio presentation for iconic film works than the latest and greatest spiffy UHD is? But it's 2025, and that's the world we live in. Let's see. North by Northwest got off easier than the searchers from the sound of it. Yes, you are correct. There is uh, there is noise reduction on North by Northwest. There are defects on North by Northwest that aren't on the 1980s VHS tape, but the searchers got hit with crazy noise reduction. In fact, I think it's probably the most it's ever had on home video, and all the past releases had heavy amounts. So yeah, that was I don't know how to describe that. That was that in and of itself makes the supposed restoration not a restoration at all. Let's see. Sylvan says, I've seen some of your videos on the Hardy Boys and Three Investigators. Do you have any of the Tom Swift series in your library? I've always meant to. I've read the Nancy Drews over the years and have a number of Nancy books, but I never really got much into Tom Swift. I read a few of the Tom Swift Juniors and I've read a few of the original series, but I've never actually collected them. So that's one of the other Stratemeyer Syndicate books that I've always meant to get more into, but I guess it was because they were I mean, they had adventure elements, but it was much more on the science of things. So as a kid, they never quite grabbed my attention in the way that the Hardy Boys did. Although I do have the crossovers in terms of the two that they did, the Hardy Boys case files, and then I do have some of the edgier late '80s paperbacks they did for Archway of Tom Swift. So I do have some Tom Swifts, but it's mostly some outliers. Then I think I have one of the junior series. Will you ever do a video or series where you just show us your collection, not just individual items, like shelves and everything together? Yeah, it's something I've always meant to do, but the way I've had to do everything in my space and how everything keeps growing and shrinking and moving, I kind of have sections everywhere, and I've been trying to do overhauls as I go, but I'm still just kind of all kinds of compartmentalized. So it's nothing, unfortunately, nothing very fancy at the moment. But I'm trying to at least get to a point where I have things relatively ordered, and I'm also not sure if I'm going to have to move in the next year, and that in and of itself is going to be an interesting experience with a lot of physical media and especially a lot of oversized laser discs. So yeah, if that comes to pass, then I'll probably be starting from scratch in terms of setup. So I don't know if I'll be doing a collection tour anytime soon, but I would like to at least do something going over just some of my whole other collections, like I did for my I know I did all of my film books at the time. I did videos where I kind of highlighted every film biography I had, and I did do, or at least the first chunk of my final record collection, and I always meant to get back to that, and then I never did. So I'd like to pick up with that at some point and at least keep going through the alphabet. I made it through D, so I've been meaning to get back to the E and F section for ages. Let's see. Fred says, I'm convinced no one mixes for the center channel anymore with dialogue. Even Amazon has a dialogue boost option for a lot of their stuff. Yeah, they certainly don't do dialogue panning anymore. That's a lost art form that I wish would come back. But the art of dialogue mixing has been set back a lot by dynamic range compression and people not caring as much about sound when they're bumping everything to streaming, obviously, and then consumer equipment not being great and TV speakers being terrible these days. And you then have to put money into a receiver and separate speakers. And then by the time you do that, you come to the realization that unfortunately most mixes aren't all that great, and especially the dialogue mixing isn't that great. Let's do, there seems to be a new German Blu-ray out of Ford's The Fugitive and The Lost Patrol. Anyone know if the former is the same kind of wonky transfer as the Japanese Blu-ray? I've seen reference of those. And I assumed they were the source HD master for the Warner DVDs, like what will pop up on streaming sometimes, where it's like 720p or like just barely 1080p, but it's obviously the same as the DVD, and it doesn't have that full sort of HD quality effect. So I assumed it was something like that because that has happened with some Warner titles that had HD masters made for those DVDs. It is possible though that the one could be using the Japanese Blu-ray master that was literally just a print scan. I did finally get to look at one of those, and those literally are just like whatever prints they had, and they did a basic scan, and they're really cool to look at, but also not a proper reference either. Let's see. Skylight says, speaking of early HD scans, made the horrifying discovery that the remastered Blu-ray for MI1 is great, but the download code is still for the 2006 scan. I can't escape it. No, you can't. And as I said in my review, you buy the UHD set, you get it again because it never goes away. Oh boy. Let's see. Let's see. Heftech sends a super chat. Thank you. Have you heard in UHD of the Secret of Nim? Previous releases have been subpar. That was just done by Eureka, but that was Blu-ray only. At least I think it was Eureka, if I'm remembering it correctly. I don't know if there's a newer scan that would require having to get a brand new scan and probably starting from scratch. I just don't know if anybody has done that, or if the rights holders would be interested in that at this time. It would be great to see. I still would like to get that new release and look at that because I'm sure it's much spiffier than what we've had before. Let's see. The worst Lowry ever was Citizen Kane. I remember taking that DVD out of the library and being, wow, it looks like it was digitally shot. It it was one of those, where it was kinda earlier on and, it was before I was, able to discuss this stuff online, so when you bought that DVD and you were watching on a, just a halfway decent CRT, it was kinda like, "Wow, this is so much sharper than my VHS copy," but once you got to looking at it more closely and looking at it on better equipment and, all that quickly went away. Um Yeah, that was pretty bad. It wasn't the worst though. The worst, especially for black and white, was what they did to Sunset Boulevard. That if you look at that initial Paramount DVD, that was a Lowry master. Not only is it a smeary mess, but it looks greenish because the grayscale is off. And whew, that was one I bought around the same time and same experience. First time watching on CRT that wasn't very good was like, wow, this is so much sharper than VHS. And then you look at it on anything else, it's like, oh dear, what happened? Let's see. Uh, the Searchers 2006 Blu-rays a bit opened up compared to the UHD. Because yeah, basically comparing the 1.78 to the technically accurate 1.85 to 1 that the UHD goes with. It is major getting 185 on the Searchers, and While one would wish there would still be an option to preserve the more open visuals of the 1.78, I am happy that they finally did address that on the UHD. Let's see. Did you ever purchase the great disappointment that is REM's Up Anniversary set? Somehow even more disappointing than the new adventure set. Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth. I was going to get it back when it came out, and then when I realized all that really was there was the live performance on CD, it's just like, well, then I'll get it eventually because getting the full set with the Blu-ray was pretty pricey, and then I kind of didn't get around to it, and then I did finally just get a copy, so I am going to do a review. But yeah, that was really disappointing because there's tons of materials we've kind of heard of or seen reference to and stuff, and I know I'm just one of many fans who for years thought about a box set or a rarities disc or some demos and things, and we didn't get any of that. And then it's kind of like, well, then why did we do a box set? It's like, plus the album remaster is less dynamic than the original CD, which already had a bit of loudness in it. So it's like, well, basically we bought this for a Blu-ray disc and the live show that some people already had versions of. So it's like, okay. Let's see. Lucas DNR the film out tapes for the Phantom Menace. He even did so for Attack of the Clones. This is a digital movie. Jackson Road processed. Lord of the Rings. Yeah, all those films are kind of stuck in a similar sort of quagmire. Mhm. Oh, SWAT Overlord says, I saw a red faded 70 mil blow up print of the Wild Bunch with the intermission titles. Mike Siegel's photo shows the titles as green. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know there were any photos up, so I will have to check that out. Scott says the Great Escape UHD from Arrow is fantastic. Watched it last night. Hope you agree. It's definitely a matter of like, well, let's see, how many times is this? We had the MGM doing a new master finally. Criterion did the Blu-ray. Kino did their UHD. Now Arrow's done their UHD, and it's like now finally we have gotten over hurdles of the past releases, and there's a new mono mix transfer, which I couldn't believe they had done. I thought it was going to be the same noise reduced track recycled again, and if all of that wasn't enough of an inducement, it is loaded with supplements, and they put the Great Escape 2 on this set, and it's on a UHD. It's not tossed on as a Blu-ray. It gets its own separate UHD. So just in terms of overall value, it's one of the best values of the past year, and it's definitely a review I am very much looking forward to doing. Let's see. Oh, Sean, thank you. Thanks for dropping in. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts on the Cover box set. Yes, I that's one, like I said earlier. I've got the first part recorded, so I just have to edit that and put all the screen caps in. But that's going to be a long ongoing project because that is an unbelievably important set for its contents. It's long overdue. Sony did make some choices that I don't quite understand and don't quite agree with, and it doesn't have all the Columbia films either, but still, it's just such an important set and has such a variety of transfers that I thought it was important to go over it in detail and break it up into different separate videos. Alrighty. I'm just scrolling through. I want to say thanks for all the thank yous, everybody. It's really wonderful to see. Let's see. Ronald asks, any well-known older film not on DVD or Blu-ray? I'm trying to think off the top of my head. Obviously, the proper 1978 version of THX 1138 is stuck as Laserdisc only. And then similarly, the Roadshow version of the Alamo is stuck in no man's land because MGM let that one 70 millimeter print rot. Um, There's a whole bunch and that are stuck in sort of rights limbo. You've got the Bristol Myers Squibb films that is most famously you've got Heartbreak Kid and obviously Stepford Wives and Sleuth, but those did at least get some of those did get DVD, but yeah, those are long overdue. The big one, of course, is the Golden Princess library, and now that Shout Factory has stepped in with all those, it's like that is gonna be amazing to see any positive movement, but there's no telling how they're doing it, when they're doing it, how many they're doing, how they're gonna we'll just have to wait and see how they do that sort of rollout, but that's a giant one. When you do a live stream and you're drinking a soda and you actually start to drink it backwards and you get the tab in your mouth, and you're like, "Oh, if I wasn't a geek enough." Oh, Matthew talking about the Fleischer Supermans being yeah, the horrible Blu-ray, why didn't they give it to the archive? Yeah, the rumor or sort of fan theory is that it happened during the sort of shakeup where George Feltenstein was out and then back, and they apparently had plans. They were going to work on it and try to get it right, and the studio label decided they were just going to do it. And notes? Well, who needs notes? We'll just recreate the DVD errors and add new ones. Yeah, that's a good plan. Let's see. Would you like the Star Trek TNG upscale to a UH to 4K? I mean, I guess it would be possible if you were looking at those lovely Blu-ray masters, that they did. You could potentially upscale those to 4K. I don't know what they finished those in. I would guess just as 2K files. So, it would be possible, I suppose. But then it would also depend on what they finish the new effects shots in, which I also assume were done at 2K. So you'd probably be looking at some sort of upscale, I would guess. I don't think they obviously would have finished the whole show as a 4K master, but you could see some benefit, I think, going to UHD, but probably not all that much, and it would be very expensive to do. So it's probably not something they would go into. Oh, thanks for the super chat, Robert. Wow, that's really generous of you. Thank you. Let's see. Question is, what is your main Laserdisc player, and are you using a modern AV receiver or vintage one that has Dolby Pro Logic, EX, or DTS ES decoding? I'm concerned about sound being recreated correctly. Those are good questions. It's unfortunately not an easy answer, especially in terms of receivers and how because they all implement processing differently. But for Laserdisc, I use my main is a Panasonic LX900, which is one of the best players I think you can get in terms of performance and it not costing the extreme amounts of like the XO and the most legendary Laserdisc players. The reason why I love it so much is its video output doesn't input. It doesn't have CLV smear like Pioneers players usually do. It doesn't have it has a remarkably clear picture. It does have some quirks. You do have to try and find the later models without the brightness issue the first models had, and it does cut a tiny amount of the picture off of one side because every Laserdisc player has some weird quirk that you can't get away from. But if you can find one, they are fantastic, and I would strongly recommend them because they don't have any sort of CLV smear to them, and they don't exhibit a lot of ringing in the picture. It's basically one of those really great player models you can get if you want the clearest, most, or I should say, the least processed looking video output out of an LD player you can get without going to the super high end legendary players. But again, it's hard to find an LX900 to begin with, and then you have to try to find one of the later models. So it is one you definitely have to put in a lot of patience and search for a very long time. But to answer your other question, I right now receiver wise, I'm still using my Onkyo I've had for a number of years, so it's not technically brand new. It's still a couple years old, but the onboard processing for Dolby Pro Logic has been slightly upgraded over the years with each new format, but the basic concept is still the same. And as long as you're not using one of the different modes, like music mode, as long as you're specifically in the movie mode form, it is still working off the original cinema standard decoding. But the thing with Pro Logic is they actually went past and surpassed the cinema decoding actual equation back in like the mid 1990s. They kind of got to the cinema decoding point in terms of how good that was, then went forward. The trouble with 5.1 and then 7.1 systems and now Atmos systems is that when you engage any form of Pro Logic or trying to decode the sound back out when it's matrix stereo, some of the systems kind of want to then spread it out further and kind of stereoize the what's supposed to be a mono surround. So what you have to do is get your setup going and then just kind of try every option you have in a receiver, and you have to try to find the format or the option that doesn't do that. I think Dolby does a very good job at trying not to do that, but when you get past the 7.1 systems, it kind of wants to it kind of wants to spread stuff around no matter what. So I wish there was like a pure like a pure direct option for matrix stereo, if that was a thing where you could legitimately just get a modern system to decode out left, center, right, mono, surround, and just be duplicating that in your rear speakers if it was say 5.1. But they don't really design this stuff and think about past outdated formats. So we're kind of lucky we even have matrix stereo tracks preserved in some form, and then you just have to play around with your equipment and try to get it as accurate as you can. The only way to actually get it fully accurate would be to actually get like a vintage Dolby unit for theatrical decoding and do like some people have done of having cinema equipment in your house and then trying to rig things together, and then you're still going to be taking outs and having to put that into a receiver and jump back and forth. So unfortunately there's no perfect answer. You basically just have to try and do as best you can. I would say as a last point, I have found it is helpful to have at least some vintage older releases of films of that era with matrix stereo tracks, where I can put on a laser disc of something and I can tell it's an original era Dolby stereo mix where they haven't messed around with it in any way. So that way I can find out what that's like in my system. And then if you have the same film on DVD or Blu-ray or UHD, and it has some form of the matrix stereo, then you can put that on your system and compare. So if there's a film you're really familiar with that was matrix stereo originally, I think it's really helpful to have, either the VHS or Laserdisc or something older that has the original matrix stereo track, and see how that plays on your system with the different options you have, and then compare that with the modern version, and basically see how all of those are in your system, and that can be a really helpful way to at least try to get things ironed out on your end to at least be as accurate as you can. But again, they don't make any of this stuff easy to do. Ready? Uh, of course, then trying to find your place again is fun. I know this it's riveting when I'm just doing my whole, oh, let me get my glasses on and go over here to my live chat. Let's do. All right, I think I'm back at the right place. Joe asks if I'm a subscriber to MI6 Confidential magazine. I've wanted to before. I always kind of forget about it, and then when I do, I've missed out on issues I wanted, or the special issues. So I'd like to at some point. It's also kind of hard for me when it's a Bond specific publication, because usually, like if I get a Bond magazine, there's not a whole lot I don't already know or haven't read a book about or something. So I would like to at least get some of the issues at some point, but I've never subscribed. Um, let's see. Yes, I do have more indicator Blu-ray reviews upcoming. I meant to review more of their 2024 releases, but unfortunately, I missed out on some of the sales, and my wallet does not allow me to purchase all of the things that I want to review. So I have to wait and save up. So I am planning on at least trying to get some more of the 2024 indicator releases in, and then review those as soon as possible, even though it's now 2025. Oh, well, thank you, Shemp. Thanks for the thank you. And I've yet to come across anyone else who puts in the work you do in home video reviews. Yeah, not to toot my own horn, but when you see a video that I make and I've edited it and put it all out there and have timestamps and everything, you're only seeing like the end product. You're not seeing all of the other stuff, and watching something and rewatching it and taking transfer notes and going over my notes, and trying to figure out if there's another release that I should check out or try to find on eBay, and then getting that in and hoping that it doesn't cost some exorbitant amount. And then if it's a tape, hooking up my VCR to my capture device again and capturing the audio track to then bring that in to look at the waveform. And then when you're cramming in all this stuff when you don't have time, and you suddenly realize you've been staring at a screen looking at 16 different waveforms of the same film audio. And it's like 1:30 in the morning, and you thought, oh well, I can just work on this for a minute. I gotta look at these waveforms. I gotta compare. And then you're like, I've been staring at this screen for an hour. th- what am what am I doing? So it's nice to hear that people are at least getting something out of these videos I put together. Have you gotten anything from Radiance yet? I've been wanting to. That's one of the labels that I've been kind of slacking on, because again, the wallet kind of says I can spend only so much, and then there have been all these high profile titles, and then all the other stuff I had already purchased. And then usually by the time I'm looking at everything else, I'm like, and I'm broke again. Great. So I do really want to cover one of their releases at some point, but it's just it's hard to keep up with everything that comes out. And then by the time you look at something again, then the limited version is gone, and you're having to wait for the standard version. And then by the time you remember that again, suddenly you've bought other stuff, and then you're like, I'm broke again. Dang it. Let's see. Da, da, da. What's the best physical media release of the Bond films so far? That's a tricky question. I mean, the easy answer is the Blu-ray releases, because they are watchable. They have all of the legacy supplements. They are overall better than the Ultimate Edition DVDs. The North American ones all have some form of original audio, but I have tons of problems with all those transfers, and none of them are what they should be, and the audio isn't what it should be quality wise. So basically, in short, the Blu-rays, for a purist option, actually, I would say the MGM Letterbox Laserdisc series that started in 88, 89, went through 94. But that, of course, is only going to get you through License to Kill. So yeah, I would say it's basically a mix between those two, depending on how much of a, purist you are for this sort of stuff. From what I gather, Alien UHD was recommended and Aliens is a skip due to the AI processing. Yeah, basically. Yeah, because if you get the Aliens UHD, you're basically rebuying the Blu-ray you already have. They took that master and hit it with processing and stuff and repackaged it as a UHD and said, "Here you go." Whereas Alien was, completely different in how it was handled. Enzo asks, "Can you speak to your contributions on the Arrows Dollars trilogy? Been very curious since seeing your community posts." As I said before, just I wasn't able to do very much. They were already, just they had the ball rolling. But I just emailed some of the Arrow team because I kind of had talked with some of them on Twitter a little bit. But I just as soon as they made a post that kind of maybe sort of teased that they might be doing Fistful of Dollars or anything in that wheelhouse, I was like, okay, just in case. I wrote an email basically saying, hey, if any of this is possible, or if this is a potential thing, if this is a teaser in any way, just anything I can do, let me know. Like I will just I will send you audio captures or give advice, anything. I'm happy to do so. So that's basically what happened, and then I was able to you know, uh, share a bunch of my audio captures in case it might help with reference or anything. So again, I was just kind of like the last extra person, being able to assist in some very small way, but just anything I could do to help. Essentially, that was basically the extent of my involvement. But at least I get to say I helped somewhere. Which is something I never thought I'd get to say. Uh, Dill's talking about not being a fan of Funimation remasters overall, with those having various issues. I don't venture much into anime, but you say Funimation, and my head immediately thinks of the Speed Racer Blu-rays and how I've been preparing a review of those for some time, and how I have a lot of thoughts on those. Ooh, favorite limited edition from any label? Guyet, that is a good question. Gosh, on the spot, I don't know if I could pick one that was well, the easy answer, the one that made me first just completely drop what I was doing and go out and say, I've got to find out more about this. This is the type of effort I've always wanted to see something get. That was when Indicator had their Night of the Demon limited edition box set with different masters, different cuts, different ratios, and hours upon hours of supplements in a beautiful package. That was the set that made me realize that somebody could really go the extra mile everywhere in trying to do a single film justice and giving a single film a box set. So in terms of Blu-ray and UHD, that's still the one that I think really made me go, so that's how you do it. That's how you do that level of care for a single film, because that's what I'd always wanted to do for my favorite films, for example. And that film had never had its proper due on home video. So that one still I have great affection for. So that's probably the easiest answer. Hogan asked, "Do you think we'll ever get Gone with the Wind as a 4K master?" There's a DCP that's in 4K. They've talked about it on Warner Archive podcast. That's on the top Warner titles list, but they're doing those one at a time because it's so much work, and they put all the extra scrutiny on it. So getting North by Northwest and the Searchers, those are also on that short list. So there's like the handful of titles that are the big top tier crown jewels that some require more work than others. Gone with the Wind, because it's 3 strip, they have to do the whole digital re-registration of the color elements, and then do far more intensive color grading because of HDR. So I think that's the holdup, obviously. So it's going to happen. They are working on it in some fashion. If there's already a 4K DCP out there, then maybe they are closer to being done. because I don't think they could have made anything that was a 4K DCP out of pre-existing materials. But I mean, I can't remember what the actual, or I'm not sure what the Blu-ray master being sourced from, what that actual digital master was finished at. I know it was a high res scan, but I don't know if they finished it at 4K. They may have, and that may be what the DCP is coming from. But yeah, I know it's being worked on somewhere in the Warner machinery, but when and where it's going to happen, I couldn't say. Ben Hur's in the same place, and I presume they haven't talked about it specifically, but I presume Adventures of Robin Hood is the same way, and that is another, why wasn't this redone ages ago, because it's stuck on an early Warner Blu-ray. But that's another of the major crown jewel titles. Uh, you don't even like Kirk's Casino Royale. People who know me know I have great issues with the way the Bond films have been handled after a certain point, and I have zero love for the Craig era. I will admit some films like Casino Royale 2006 are stronger than others in that group, but I also have great issues in how the adaptation of Fleming's novel was handled, and so um, I I've never been able to enjoy that film. I remember seeing it in the theater the back when it was released in 2006, because I saw it opening week, and I don't think I've ever quite recovered, but that's just me. So that's me trying to put it politely in ways. But it is the most energetic of the Craig films, and I think there's a reason why it's one that so many people responded to, because a Bond film does need energy, and after that they didn't they were not able to maintain that, which was unfortunate, because they really needed to. Let's see. Uh, Please review more Indicator and BFI releases, and especially like Seven Samurai, Seventh Seal, and a few others. Yeah, I really want to cover Seven Samurai, because that's an interesting notion of BFI handling it one way and then Criterion handling it a completely different way, but then doing additional restoration work. I think it was done by a different group as well, and seemingly kind of taking it upon themselves to do that instead of it being the rights holders. So I was kind of torn about how I should handle that in terms of trying to review it, but basically, I'm just going to have to purchase both of them, I guess, and look at them in person, and then that way I could actually review how that master was handled. But unfortunately, I already know that both of them have not good sounding mono tracks, so that kind of doesn't make it very enticing to purchase a new release when I already know the audio, whichever release you go with, is not what it should be. That kind of takes some of the sparkle out of having to drop 40 some odd dollars times two. I would pay money to see you move your HD CRT. Yeah, I'm gonna have to get help. Oh dear. Yeah, CRTs are one thing when you move them. When they're HD CRTs and like twice as heavy and have the flat glass fronts, and they're 16 by 9, so they're no longer 4:3, that's when it gets even more difficult. But if you think that's bad, try moving one of Sony's flagships with the super fine pitch tube, where it's even heavier than a normal HD CRT. And then I thought my 960 was bad, but then I got to play around with the XS 955 4.3 version, which is even okay. I think I'm good. I think I dropped out there for a second. I was basically going to say, if you ever have to move the Sony XS955, which is the 4.3 version of their super fine pitch best HD CRT they ever made, that is the hardest thing I've ever had to move. So I would not recommend. Okay. Dr. Mad talking about becoming obsessed with media books, which is yeah, started off in Germany. Yeah, that seems to be more of a European thing. They are pretty cool when they do them here. I've only looked at one or two of them. Let's see. If a UHD of Sleeping Beauty is announced, then hopefully it includes either the 2003 commentary with isolated M&E and ports all the extras. Yeah, I keep wondering and waiting to see what Disney does with their other catalog UHDs because I thought we were going to start seeing maybe 1 or 2 a year or something as their in-house restoration work was going on, but there hasn't been any signs of movement that I've seen on that, so I don't know how they're, proceeding along with those. Yeah, the Hitchcock Selznick titles that are under Disney, it looks like we're finally seeing movement on those because we've got a new release of the Parodying Case, and since I'm like one of the only fans of that movie, I'm just like, finally. So that's long overdue, and so I would presume we could potentially see Lifeboat since that was under Fox. I guess that would probably go to Kino or another boutique label, and then Criterion would probably relicense and do UHDs of Rebecca, Spellbound, and Notorious if and when those were finished. Yes, Mark, I am doing all of the La La Land Bond scores. I'm going to be doing recording reviews of Moonraker and Golden Gun, and as I said before, I'm just waiting on License to Kill to get to me in the mail. Dill asks, would you ever look at the original Toy Story? The original theatrical version it was only released on Laserdisc and VHS, and the version since is a re-render. Yeah, that's one of those where I understand why they did it, but I'm always going to have that initial Laserdisc release because that's the only one that was actually done from 35 millimeter film materials from the original release. Everything else is a new digital re-render. I've never been able to get the big CAV box set at a decent price. That's the one that well, actually, that's one of the only Disney box sets on Laserdisc that I've still been meaning to find. Plus, there's the DTS variant, but at least the standard disc is out there and relatively affordable, and it's the same master. But I would like to get the full box set. But every time that goes up on eBay, it's always overpriced for some reason or more expensive. Let's see. For the best audio of Seven Samurai, you need to get the Toho UHD, but the Toho UHD has no English subtitles and has the worst picture quality of Seven Samurai due to its heavy grain production. Yeah, as Mateus points out, it's not easy trying to do this stuff. And for Seven Samurai, you got to buy multiple releases and pick and choose and cobble elements together. Mike Barrett asks, how do you arrange your collection? Trial and effort in terms of trying to fit everything into my limited space and the shelves that I do have. I'm usually kind of rotating things around, but in terms of actually organizing, I always go. I go chronologically, actually. Most people alphabetize. The way my brain works, I like having everything in release order. So I start from the silent era and work all the way up to the present, and then have a few sections where I've got like most of a director's filmography. I'll have those like Capra films, Wilder, Ford, Hitchcock, Kubrick. I'll have those kind of grouped together, and then the only other thing would be like having series together, like all my Bond film releases. And then as you see behind me, this is where I've got some of my box sets because they're of course different dimensions than standard releases. But that's basically what I do for all the formats that I collect. And then obviously I've got DVD in one spot, I've got Blu-ray and then UHD kind of separated, and then Laserdisc is its own thing because it takes up more space than anything. And that's the stuff you don't get told when you start collecting other media formats, that then you get to one day where you realize, I'm out of space. What am I doing? Solo Fed asks, how have you been enjoying the expanded Moonraker score? Kind of amazed to learn how Barry originally scored the gondola scene. Yes. Oh my gosh. It would have tamped down the ridiculousness factor. That was such an eye opener because I was doing I went in completely without reading any reviews or forum posts or anything because I wanted to go in fresh. And that was one of the moments when I got to the gondola, the St. Mark's Square sequence, and it has a previously unheard John Barry cue that's admittedly a bit fun but much more dramatic. It's like head explode. So there's a number of moments in that, especially hearing the Moonraker demos with the completely different lyrics, and even the disco end title has an alternate version. It is a treasure trove, and getting to hear the cues without edits and without the being in the album version, it was just like, yeah, this is the release we've always wanted. So yeah, that whew, I expected there to be some additional music that was unearthed in that, in terms of there being, maybe a couple minutes, but I think it's at least like 10 minutes of previously unreleased Barry cues. And I'm just like, Christmas has come early. Alrighty. I think I'm caught up to the end of the chat, so let me get through these. Let's see. Joe M was able to get the Toy Story box set at a Google auction with the Ultimate Oz and Cinderella CUV set for around $40. Yes, you were very lucky. That is a fantastic price, especially since all three of those are quite hefty. So I'm sure the shipping on those normally would be about $40. So that's fantastic. Let's see. If Disney releases Fantasia in UHD, would you do a detailed video on the history of the many edits and home video releases like you did for Once Upon a Time in the West? That would be a good one, but that would also be a very long one. There's been so many tweaks and changes of Fantasia, and then all the various theatrical reissues and things that I don't know if there's a comprehensive list of all of the various edits and tweaks and changes and things that have happened over time, and then the status of the audio and the audio remixes and things. So that would be a research project in and of itself. But yeah, that would be, I would truly hope that they would put more effort into getting Fantasia right, and doing something that was, for a real preservation style release. Oh, Skylet was able to pick up the 1999 first Warner Stanley Kubrick box set on DVD. Yeah, worth its weight in gold for the mono tracks of Clockwork and Shining are, well, Clockwork especially, that's still the best mono presentation you can get, and the UHD basically kind of recycles that. But that set is really strange in that it was inferior when it came out because they basically used Laserdisc master materials and tried to rush them out on a DVD, and everybody complained, rightfully so. But some of this somehow turned up better audio sources because that track for Clockwork Orange is better than what was on the old Laserdisc master, whose materials that were otherwise being used for that not so great DVD. So that's a great set to have, and it's not an easy one to get because it was basically put on moratorium. So I don't think they made that many. And when it pops up, even in poor condition, it's usually pricey because it's the all white box, and people go, "Ooh, it looks great. I want to put it on a shelf." But I still would like to get that set someday. I just every time I look for it, it's usually got a premium price tag. Fred, the Moonraker score was done by La La Land Records. They're the ones doing all of the expanded James Bond soundtrack restorations, and you just go to their website because they're exclusively sold on their website, La La Land Records, and the 007 store. So it's a limited availability deal for these newer releases. Oh, Matthew picked up some Japanese releases on LD. Awesome. Yeah, the deal factor of Laserdisc pickups is very hit or miss. You usually go through dry spells where it's like all of a sudden you find a couple really cool Laserdiscs that you've wanted for super cheap in your local area, or a couple things on eBay, and then it's like nothing for 6 months. It's just like it's either finding loads of great bargains or nothing. There's usually no in between. Frederick's talking about the releases of Cutthroat Island, comparing the 2009 Blu-ray to the new 4K UHD with awful color regrading and an overabundance of yellow. I have seen an image or two of that. That is one I would like to review because I do think that film has was well, I think it was unfairly treated when it came out. It has such a reputation that when you actually go and see it, you're like, this isn't bad. There, it's practical effects work. They actually went and did this stuff, which is not easy to do, and of course, very expensive. So of course, it had a large budget. And people don't do that anymore. They don't make pirate films with actual ships and practical work and practical locations. So, and the 5 point, the mix for the time is really good and still pretty bombastic today. So it's a film I enjoyed really discovering on Laserdisc and rewatching every once in a while. So I was happy to see it got a new 4K master. But yeah, Studio Canal has a penchant for doing terribly revisionist color grades. They did that awful. They did a great new scan of Red Sonja of all films, and then gave it that horrible color grading, so it kind of made that useless. So, and then Arrow did the other two Conan films and kind of made those as good as they could be. So it's like that really shows you the difference where somebody making decisions isn't really doing it for how a film was originally. Ken's here. Hey man, asking about thoughts on James Gunn and the upcoming Superman film. Um, I will say that I am happy to see that it at least is a Superman movie that kind of likes Superman and has some semblance of a hopeful tone in it. There hasn't been a Superman film to have that sort of spirit in it since Quest for Peace. So it's been a while. So um I hope it turns out well. I didn't think the trailer visuals in terms of the CG and some of the cinematography, it didn't really wow me in that way, but I was at least happy to see that there was some adventurous spirit to it. So, I hope it does well. They need some sort of shot in the arm in terms of the DC film releases to at least get more positive standing, and everything they've tried so far hasn't really worked. So, I guess I'm not really holding out any hope. Like I'm not expecting anything. I would hope it's solid and sort of gets them some sort of positive response, because they do really need that. They've kind of been just like throwing stuff at the wall and seeing if anything sticks for so long that I think a lot of people kind of gave up. So uh, I'm somewhat hopeful, I guess. I hope it turns out well. Okay, I see some aspect ratio talk talking about bizarre reissues, like Fantasia getting a CinemaScope reissue, and that makes me think of the crazy 70 millimeter Gone with the Wind reissue, where they were like, "We're gonna blow it up to 70 millimeter, aspect ratio be damned," and it was successful because, oh dear, people don't think about aspect ratios. Yeah, I am so far behind on Warner Archive releases. It's on one hand, it's great that they do titles every month, but also it's very easy to fall behind, and then it's harder to want to purchase all of them as soon as they come out because the price fluctuates so much. So sometimes you could buy a Warner Archive Blu-ray, especially because they're mostly on Amazon, and those will just like fluctuate every few hours. So when you know that if you pre-order something or purchase it when it comes out, you may be paying a full 25 to $30, but if you bought it the next day, it could be marked down to 14 or 11 or randomly dropped down to like $7. It's like, what? So I've kind of found that on archive titles, I kind of like to wait a little bit after they've been out, maybe a day or two, just to see if that price is going to fluctuate some. But yeah, I'm really behind on some of the more modern releases, and I've got a couple that I'm going to do reviews of, or I should say, I've been meaning to do reviews of, but my to do list keeps growing and growing and growing. So I am trying to catch up on their releases over the past year and a half. Oh, thank you, Joe. Talking about my video histories, I've got a couple more that I'd like to do. I kind of think I might do one on North by Northwest and maybe one on the Searchers too, because they kind of have a similar trajectory, and I could probably get it into a video form rather easily because it's basically built around different eras of the company's video releases and styles. So it's not a whole bunch of different ones to go over, but there is a bit of minutia. So those are two that I think I'd like to try and do. Yes, that blue exploitation set is really fun looking. It's amazing that those films have not only survived but now been given that level of quality treatment. 103178 Productions. Did you see the Kill Bill for UHDs, and what are your thoughts on them? At first, I wasn't really gonna bother with those because I'm not a big Tarantino person. Although I would like to get the UHD of Jackie Brown and review that because that's the one film of his I really love. But I've seen a lot of the discussion and reviews on the Kill Bills and how it's like they're working around with some old digital intermediate and may have just tried to upscale stuff, so the quality is very limited. So those have kind of gone on my list of, oh boy, I'm going to have to review these, aren't I? It's just like not to make like reviews just because something's a potential problem disc, but when there's a lot of discussion on a particular title, then I start to kind of wonder. I'm like, well, I should probably look into this. So yeah, I think I'll probably try and take a look at those as soon as I can work it into my disc allowance essentially. That's the thing. There's so much stuff I would love to cover. One thing is finding the time. The other and even bigger problem is figuring out how I can afford all this because I have to pick and choose and then look at release announcements and then try to factor in, oh, well, that's one of my favorite films. I have to try and cover that. And then how much is that going to cost? And if I get it here, can I bundle it with this to get free shipping? And when's the next sale coming up? And so that's I look like the gif of It's Always Sunny in front of the conspiracy board. That's how I look trying to figure out how can I buy more discs? How can I afford all these releases? And oh crap, here's all the ones I haven't gotten yet, and here's the ones I forgot about, and here's the ones from last year I didn't get. So yeah, that's how I always look. Dun, dun, dun. Yes, it's hard to get used to the remixes of Fantasia because I understand they changed the narration and changed the actor, but it's so ingrained with the Deems Taylor performance and his particular voice that 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 does need to be preserved, even if they're remixing the film entirely. They at least have some option for all of that to be retained somehow in a secondary remix. You know, give people the option somehow. Do you have a day job? Yes. So everything I do on YouTube and elsewhere is just trying to cram it in wherever I can. And sometimes that's in the wee hours of the morning, or I usually wind up having to try and do everything on my off days. So I have to sit down and do as much work as I can on like a weekend afternoon, and then try and split it up and figure out how I can cram everything in. So it's just squirreling away little bits of time, just wherever possible. Oh, hi, Jake. Jake is at good old groovy Jake is the person who helped get all of the wonderful German Indiana Jones novels in terms of the fan translations, actually packaged and put out nicely in the form you see him on the Internet Archive. So that's what I've been reading. So yeah, and also he worked on preserving the Find Your Fate books, and I can't wait to dive into those others because I've been trying to find some of those other Find Your Fates, and they are stupidly expensive, and they rarely pop up. And trying to complete a set is just, I mean, obviously they're rare, but you wouldn't think it would be that expensive and that difficult to try and get children's choose your own adventure style books that most people have never heard of. That's one of those things you get into in terms of being a fan of something and then suddenly go, oh, this is expensive too. Oh, great. So yeah, if you haven't checked out the packagings that Jake has done of those preservations on the Internet Archive, you definitely should. Let's see. Uh, Swat talking about the remixes and original mixes of Sound of Music. Yeah, that's a film where they've kind of handled that in a variety of different ways over the years. I don't know if I've ever sat down with the versions I have and done tried to figure out if there's better fidelity options or more sort of purist options. But yeah, that's kind of like Ten Commandments and others where they've remixed it in different ways in different eras, and then some kind of persist for a while. So it's like you would have to get together like probably 5 or 6 different versions of media releases just to have all the major attempts and then sit down and kind of compare them all. Top 3 personal favorite Hardy Boys books. Oh gosh, that's I don't know why it has those little dropouts sometimes. I know my connection's good, but I think I'm back now. Um, but yeah, top 3 Hardy Boys books. I mean, the number one's always going to be Cabin Island because that was the first I ever read. That's my nostalgic favorite. So that's always going to be number one. The other two I could probably slot in most any of them. There's not I love every book in the original canon. I love all the original texts, even the weird ones like Disappearing Floor. I enjoy. Um, I've read almost all the digest, and I love all of those. I've read some of the newer series, and those are enjoyable in their own way. And I've read almost every case file, and I love all of those except for Cave Trap because that's a weird book in and of itself. Um, So yeah, it would definitely be Cabin Island at number one, and then probably other nostalgic favorites like I still love Secret Agent on Flight 101 because it was a Spy Hardy Boys book and I was a Bond obsessed kid. And I know it's kind of goofy, but that's still one of my favorites. Probably have Masked Monkey and Jungle Pyramid and Shore Road Mystery in there. I could I slot in basically any of the other original canon books, but I do know for a fact Cabin Island would be my number one. Let's see, Tidbit Kid, welcome. Found out about you from Zerini Zarek and Razor Eye Reviews. Thank you. Yeah, they're all those are wonderful channels. I've followed both of them for years. It's kind of amazing when I chat with other YouTubers who I've followed for ages and they actually know who I am. I'm like, oh wow, it feels kind of weird because I've watched your videos for ages and you know my silly little channel. Uh, Jake says the indie Find Your Fate Mask of the Elephant is almost impossible to find due to it being the last and never re-release. It's like $300. Yeah, the only reason it's preserved is a fan converted it to a website game years ago, and someone saved it before that site went down. Man, those are crazy, and the last few of the young indie random houses are in a similar state, and sellers wanna charge insane amounts for those, like, every time I look at them again, there'll be, a couple for, like, in the 50 to 80 or $100 range, and then there'll be the one seller that wants $6,000 for a copy of book 15 and or $1,000 for book 16 or $600 for one of them, and you're just scratching your head like, "What?" I got the first 8 for, like, I had to search used bookstores, but I was able to get the first 8 for less than $20, but there's rarity, and then there's, "Oh, this is really rare, so I can name my own price" mentality, which I think is just wrong, but there's a reason why those don't sell and they keep getting relisted. Joe asks, "What's your opinion on the 4K release of Apocalypse Now from Lionsgate? Primarily just the original theatrical cut. I don't know enough about color timing and grading, but I think it looks good." Yeah, those are really needed actually because the what was it? The full disclosure set on Blu-ray that had a lot of digital noise reduction, and I still prefer the theatrical cut. I don't really like the other cuts anywhere near as much. I think the theatrical cut is the masterpiece version of the film. It's cool that Coppola made that new final cut. I don't know if it was really necessary, but it was cool. And also, they did the new remix for that tried to go for as much infrasonic or super low and bass that they could. So it made it into a sort of a home theater demo piece in terms of sound. They did do a good job on the UHDs, but there have been releases in Europe and other countries that were better on a technical level. The Blu-rays I know on the US set were really not well encoded. Like the bitrate was pretty low, but that was just on the Blu-ray. But that's how you get the 5.1 version of the original 1979 70 millimeter mix because they ported over the 5.1 version done for Laserdisc and DVD back in the late 90s, and that's the basically the purest option for the original audio track. But the issue on the American set is the way the cuts are branched means that the theatrical version accidentally loses a line somewhere, or it's got a line from Redux actually. So that's one of the technical quirks that was fixed on the European releases. So that's, I think, an example of a really good US release, but one that isn't quite perfect. So if you're a real fan, you kind of have to also import a European option. That's something I've been meaning to do. That's why I haven't reviewed the American set yet because I've had that since it came out, but I need to get. I think it's the I want to say it's the Italian version that is the best option, but I know there's a couple options now. Let's see. Mar2D2 asks, "What's the most you would pay for a film?" That's a good question because I think a lot of times, well, mostly studios, but people doing or in charge of releases don't necessarily think about how many people are going to want to plunk down when it's something that's got a really high price tag. Um, if it's just a single film only, and there's no supplements, it would then depend on the format. Like if it was a standard Blu-ray and it was just film only, if it was more than the 25 to $30 range, there would probably have to be a really big reason for me to pay more than that. Like if it was a Kickstarter restoration project or a small independent label that was just getting started and they had to charge more, like it would have to be something like that. Um, because if it's just a movie only, it shouldn't be more than a 25 to $30 Blu-ray release. If it's a UHD, that's obviously more expensive due to manufacturing costs and things. So if it was just a movie only UHD, then more like the 40 to $45 range. I would prefer and hope that something would have extras and supplements if I'm having to pay full retail price for something. So as long as something isn't over $50 for seemingly no reason, then I think it's obviously doable and still reasonable enough. And the more supplements and the more attention to detail and having new restoration work you have in a release, the more it makes you want to spend. But there are a number of releases that are increasingly having absurd price points. Like I really wanted to get the Studio Canal Hitchcock box set of the British films featuring the new restorations. I still really want to get that set, but it's Blu-ray only and it's really expensive for only having a certain number of films. It's at the same price, if not a little bit more expensive than the Frank Capra box set, which was a UHD Blu-ray mixture of 20 films. So that was like, the $150 range for the Capra box is more than I would usually spend, but that was a box of 20 films and a box I'd waited years for. And, when it came out, there were sales running, so I got it for a little bit less than that. Spending that much for a Studio Canal set of like I think it's what 10 Blu-rays or 11 Blu-rays in that Hitchcock set. No UHDs, no super fancy packaging or anything. That was like, no, I can't rationalize that unless I can get it on sale or something. So that's why I haven't gotten that, for example. Of course, every time I jump over to the chat, I have to find my place again because it's jumped around. So sorry if it takes me a moment when I do this. Any thoughts on the film versus digital cinematography debate, or are you just both tools in your opinion? Um, I mean, admittedly, I'm a purist. I'm a total film geek, diehard. But obviously, digital cinematography is much easier to work with and has so much more options and things. So it's always you use the best tool for the job or to achieve what you want to do. But I do think there is a certain truth to film not being just about the aesthetic, but also being about working within and around the limitations of the medium, of it forcing you to not only be more creative, but also to think and work differently. And also, you're burning money as you're using film. So it makes you more careful. It makes you more, obviously, more stressed and more anxious, but it makes you put more intensity into your thought process and your working process, and everything you do has that added notion of you're burning money, whereas with digital you can obviously shoot for as long as your card is going to run for it, and then when that fills up you can just dump your footage or swap cards, or so it doesn't have that same mentality to it, obviously. So it's two completely different methods and workflows and universes. But digital cinematography can be extraordinarily well done. For me personally, I never get the same sort of deep connection to it as I do with film photography, but that's more of a personal preference. So, it depends. They can both be done extremely well. It's just, are people going to put in the effort, and how are they going to approach it? Rob asking about if I heard anything about the Connery Bond films being released on UHD in June. No, there hasn't been anything since that news kinda got leaked, and that's why I put all my thoughts into that video I made back when that happened, because that's the only information we've gotten in years, and that seems to be the only information we're going to get until there's some sort of press release. Yeah, I'm the same way, Skylight. That if I see an older transfer with queue changeovers, it is a sort of nostalgic or nice feeling that you get. It's obviously not something that you want in something, especially if it's a modern release or restoration or something. But when it's an older transfer or something that's as is, or especially if you get to go see a repertory print screening. Yeah, that's a really nice sight to see because it's something you don't see anymore. Okay, talking about Disney considering possibly doing a Sound of Music UHD release, that would be good for Disney to do. That would be a of course a giant money maker, and a way to maybe get elements of the Fox library out there, and get the ball rolling. We need to not have a whole iconic studio library on moratorium still. Oh, favorite Fleming Bond novels. That's actually something I'm kind of working on, because I'm editing my video on From Russia with Love, the novel, and I'm trying to do a video on all of the Fleming books in order as I'm doing my sort of usual reread. But generally, I prefer the ones that are more straightforward action adventure, because I think Fleming had such a unique style, and when he did pure pulp adventure writing, he did it like nobody else ever did. But I love all the novels, so choosing favorites is kind of hard because each one's basically just kind of like a different flavor. Um, but if I had to just pick one in particular, I'm usually kind of flipping between I'm even that's kinda hard. So I kind of flip between Live and Let Die and Doctor No, but also Goldfinger, because that was the first one I ever read. In terms of, that was the first full Fleming novel I read. I read Octopussy and the Living Daylights as the first I read, but that was the short stories. So then I read Goldfinger as the first novel, and then I really love how Fleming handled action, and Live and Let Die and Doctor No kind of are the most action oriented of the books. But I mean, each one is different and unique in its own way, so it's hard to even pick favorites. But I kind of tend to prefer the ones that are the more action oriented. I really want to play Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. I've been trying to avoid spoilers, but I don't have an Xbox, and I've been meaning to get a PS5, so I thought I would wait for the PS5 version to drop, since that's supposed to be this year, or sometime relatively soon. So that's why I haven't played it yet, but as soon as I do, I will put together some sort of video about my thoughts on playing through it. Let's see. Talking about Arrows, Long Kiss Goodnight, that was a real surprise. I'm really looking forward to that because that film kinda slipped out of print on Blu-ray. It wasn't, I don't know if it was ever fully out of print, but it was just unavailable, and that's an older master, and that would be a stunning looking UHD, and that has one of the all-time great sound mixes, especially if you have the DTS Laserdisc. That's one that makes your neighbors run for the hills because it's so intensive in a good way. So I'm really looking forward to that. I think that could be a stunning UHD, and I know Arrow will put together a really nice extras package. Yes, as Bram points out, we're stuck waiting on the Warner UHDs and other 4K masters of the Cooper titles, especially Eyes Wide Shut. It's kind of now getting more questionable why there's such a big gap, and we haven't seen anything else. And we kind of thought Eyes Wide Shut might be coming, but then it didn't happen. So it's kind of like, so what's going on exactly? That it could mean that they are licensing to Criterion on those, and that causes a further delay. And so we might see as if you're a Criterion UHD in terms of having more extras and Dolby Vision and stuff. It might mean they're still working on them. It might mean they haven't worked on them at all. So there's just no way of knowing, unfortunately. Yeah, we've been working on the same drink the whole time. Yeah, that's the thing. You wind up talking so much, and then your throat starts to go dry, and you're like, oh yeah, I was drinking this back when I started. It is flat now. Yes, once you see an original release print of Ice Wide Shut, you can't go back. Yeah, that's one of the films where no home video master has ever fully replicated the experience, or they've just not tried and just kind of done their own thing. It took me a long time to be able to actually see a release print, but I've now seen a print twice shown at a repertory theater, and there's nothing else quite like it, especially if you're like me and you love seeing film grain. If you love the look of film grain, it's like just organically breathing in front of you because there's so much grain, and the boldness of the primary color usage, and the way the lighting style comes across. I mean, it's just and then you go back home and you try to watch the film again on Blu-ray, and it's just like, no, this is not the same. This is not the same movie. It doesn't have the same visual soul. It's not there anymore. Do I own Song of the South on Laserdisc? Yes, yes, I do actually. I was luckily able to get a copy. I had a copy actually that I never thought I would get. So yeah, it's not an easy disc to get. It's not really the greatest transfer in the world, and it's Japanese only. So you do have to track down a copy, and it will have the hard coded subtitles. So it's unfortunately one of those things where if you want a physical media release, you will have to make certain concessions, and you can't expect it to be a super great transfer or getting one without hard coded subtitles. Let's see. No, I never actually did get into the Boxcar Children books. They're always around, and I've always seen them, but it's just one of the other kids book series I never really got into. Which do you prefer, 2D hand drawn animation or CG animation? Hand drawn, totally. But there's nothing wrong with digital animation or CG animation. It can be unbelievably effective and achieve beautiful results. It just depends on the material and the actual the finished product itself. But if I had to choose, I would prefer to do it traditionally and using methods by hand. But of course, doing that in 2025 is not only extraordinarily time consuming and expensive, and you have to find all the right people, and there's not as many of them around in this day and age, unfortunately. Oh gosh, Fear and Desire is a review I'm working on. That Oh boy, that's a UHD that has some particular issues. Oh boy, yeah, that's going to be another one where I've got to do a long review of that Kino UHD because it's amazing we got the longer version of the film with the cut footage and that it even survives. But the way that was handled on that UHD, the HDR is nuts, and the encoding of that disc is awful. Like that's probably the worst encoding on a UHD I've seen. It's really bad. And then there's some audio sync issues and other things that oh yeah, that's a whole big review I've already been working on that I've got to do. Let's see. Eric talking about The Brutalist as an okay film, but the kind of film that you could tell the people who made it clearly thought it was a masterpiece. Oh boy, yeah. I mean, with certain films and certain genres, I think there's always the sort of thought in people's heads that they're kind of also going to get nominated for some awards. Obviously, not that they were trying to make it awards bait, but I think there's always some degree of that. But yeah, I do really want to see it. I'm just kind of waiting to see what the UHD is going to look like. There are some 35 millimeter prints being shown of it around. I think that's at a few art houses, but I don't know exactly the process that was used for those. I don't know how the film was exactly finished, and if there was a DI involved, which I assume there has to be, and so those would be digital film out prints. But still, those would be interesting to see. Let's see. Speaking of which, do you think Kino Lorber will mess up Sea of Love on UHD? That was a surprise announcement. That was a film that I never expected to get a brand new spiffy master. I only have a copy because I found the Laserdisc for cheap. It's so that was a surprise announcement. Um, not to badmouth anybody or anything, but if it's a Kino release, you got to go in knowing that they don't really do quality control checks. So there's always a great chance there could be something that was goofed up or an audio track that has problems or something went wrong somewhere. That's just kind of what you get with their releases. So there's a definite probability that there could be something that's not quite what it should be there. Rumors of Arrow doing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in terms of the original film. Long overdue. Yeah, that is long overdue that it doesn't have some sort of deluxe edition, especially with the fans being so incredibly vocal to this day about their love of that film. So yeah, that would be something that you could definitely do a deluxe UHD and just go for broke with the extras on it. The classic question, is it Berenstein or Berenstain Bears? I don't know. I really don't know. I've heard it both ways so many times. Ooh, favorite Hardy Boys book from the post-revision era. Ay, ay, ay. Hmm. Well, in terms of like the original canon, or in terms of like all the later series and continuation series, I guess would be my question from there. Um, I don't know if I have a particular favorite digest off the top of my head. Um, Case files is it's probably still No Mercy. That's always the one I think of. No Mercy or probably Evil Inc., which is book two. Um, so yeah, it would probably be something like that for the case files. But in terms of the canon, like the revised text, it's probably like I said before, Segregation on Flight 101, Jungle Pyramid, Mass Monkey, and a variety of some of the other later ones. Let's see. Um, do, 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 do. Let's see. Okay, yeah, I bet the TMMT will just because that's the Turtles films have been stuck as old Warner Masters for ages, and then they put them out on Blu-ray, and then those are super outdated. So I think Arrow is starting to get into a trend of going to outdated Warner Masters and producing new UHDs. They did it with Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. They've just done it with Demolition Man, which is another I'm reviewing, and that's a huge thing. So yeah, if they've got turtles, I'm sure it's going to be the same sort of just complete overhaul that it's needed for ages. Let's see. Oh, Carnage asking about what Indicator releases I'm talking about. Yeah, it's the Indicator limited box set of Night of the Demon, or the US title was Curse of the Demon. It's the 1957 Jacques Tourneur directed masterpiece that's one of the great horror films. That was a set that came out before I started doing YouTube reviews, so that's definitely one that I've been wanting to return to put something together about. I just didn't know if somebody was going to do a 4K master at some point. So that was one of those things where I was kind of waiting to see if anybody might like if because technically it's under Sony because it was Columbia in the US. So Sony might do a 4K master at some point, or Indicator might be able to do a UHD upgrade in terms of their box set. So I was just trying to see if anybody might do something like that before doing a new video. But yeah, I'd like to do one just on that set as a, I mean, as a review in one sense, obviously, and a video on the film that I'm obsessed with. But I kind of would like to do it just as a home video legends series, in terms of video releases that went so far, so above and beyond. So that's kind of something else I've been toying around with, and something I'd like to do some form of. Let's see. Yeah, cruising will be interesting on that Arrow UHD, Mozart's Goats. Wow, sorry, I can't talk. Mozart's Ghost. Yeah, that's gonna be defreakinized essentially. I think that's gonna be the sort of release that Arrow wanted to do the first time, or at least having a non-director approved theatrical reflective version. Um, it's kind of a shame that it had to wait this long to happen, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see. And I'm kind of like you. I admire things in that film. I admire some of the techniques. I think certain aspects are brilliant. I've just never been a fan of how kind of threadbare the actual narrative is. I don't mind the setting and the subject matter. That's I understand the film's controversy, and I've seen it multiple times over the years, but I've just never gotten into its story as much. I've been more appreciative of Friedkin's direction and the techniques he's using, and how that kind of is doing a lot of the stuff that he would refine further into Live and Die in LA. So I kind of come to cruising as a film more from that perspective, and looking at it as a big fan of To Live and Die in LA, and seeing how it influenced that film. I haven't reviewed the Conversation UHD yet because I was waiting for it to get a standard release, because Studio Canal is doing this thing where they put out these brand new restorations on UHD, but they only do them in these big, expensive European sets. And so you kind of have to wait, like sometimes a year or so. I'll be hopefully doing Conversation soon, and then I've got to get they finally just put out The Wicker Man in a non-stupidly expensive version that has all the discs. So I've got to get that. I had to wait because I wasn't going to drop $80 for a stuffed box with things I didn't need. And then the steel book was still like $60. And it's like, I don't need all that. Can I just buy the disc? And then the big one is the Third Man. That's finally getting a standalone release because I couldn't justify, the like almost $100 price tag for the thicker box that just had some swag in it. So yeah, they shouldn't make us wait like a year or 6 months or whatever the gap was. Oh, hi Tom. Thanks for dropping in. Yeah, I'm over in the UK. Yeah, it's always hard trying to schedule these, and I know I have viewers in other time zones, so it should be asleep in bed. Yeah, I know the feeling. I'm frequently doing that when I'm tinkering around with working on videos. Let's see. Dun-dun-dun. Ronan Crow asks, "Have you ever considered doing a big Star Wars home video history, including formats, all the alterations, and then the fan restorations and such?" Yes, I'd like to do something that's a bit more comprehensive and sort of all in one. I try not to go into discussing a lot of the fan projects because it's kind of one of those things where it's such a gray area, but you also don't want to you don't want to get people kind of in trouble, but now they're kind of just out there and everybody knows of them. So yeah, I think now would be a good time to put something together since we've got the four special editions and the 2019 special edition has gotten the physical release. So there's plenty of material to go over, and I'd like to put together something that got into the nitty gritty of the early releases and went through all the way to the present. Let's see. Have you gotten the UHD of the Third Man? Yeah, that's as I said, that's one I've got to pick up because I was just waiting for the standard release or the non-swag crazy price version. Yeah, the Star Wars prequels, the stuff that the fans have been able to achieve with print scans and stuff. I mean, it's a whole different experience, even with the limited resolution of clones and Sith. I mean, they're just the physical media releases and home video masters, or even the prequels, could be a heck of a lot better if they wanted to make them more accurate to the sources that they were finished at. But unfortunately, the powers that be don't agree. I really do hope Best Years of Our Lives does get a release as well. That has been long overdue, and that film tends to kind of go in and out of print because it's a Goldwyn title, and then it gets handled by different entities, and they've done different mastering approaches at times. So that's definitely one that needs an overhaul. Don't says warning from one fan to another. Don't ever listen to the Atmos mix of Everybody Hurts. I enjoy the 5.1 mix, but the Atmos mix is a sin. Yeah, if you get the automatic for the People box set, there is a new surround mix that includes Atmos, and it makes some, shall we say, creative choices in how it mixes elements around. And when it's an album that's just burned in my brain, it's hard for me to listen to any sort of surround mix, or surround remix, I should say. But um, I'm not really a fan of those, but that Atmos mix, it went way further than the Elliot Shiner old 5.1 mix did. So, yeah, if you want that album in a surround remix, the 5.1 is, I think, a bit more tasteful in how it does it. But you can then switch over to the Atmos version and get like the full, let's play with this stuff more. Oh, Mario, thank you. Don't worry about video length. I enjoy hearing you talk about movies all day. I appreciate that. I do worry about length because I what you see are the edited versions. If I just put up the raw one someday, it would be crazy because when you you get tongue tied, or I drop something, or I trip over my chair, or do all the silly things, and then that you lose your train of thought and have to figure out what you were doing. So yeah, it's what you see is the cut down version. It takes a lot longer to actually record things. So, but I try to at least have uh, some reason for still going on. So if something requires the extra length, then I'll do it. But I still try to make sure I'm always covering something of importance. Yes, that is very important to specify on the Wicker Man releases, because it's very easy to accidentally buy the one of the ones that only has one disc or two discs but doesn't have all the UHDs. And then here in the US, they were only doing the newer cuts of whoops. They were only doing the newer cuts of the films. So it's like, yeah, you really have to scrutinize on the Wicker Man releases to make sure that you're actually getting the ones that have all the discs in terms of film and supplement content. Oh no, I'm always happy to have REM discussion. Talking about my favorite band. Yes, always happy. So don't ask. Would you say the original CDs of the REM catalog are the best versions, audio quality wise, to own? Um, you kind of have to look at the different eras, because you've got the IRS days for the first five albums, then you've got the early Warner era from Green up to, I mean, really Automatic Monster, and well, New Adventures technically as well, and then up through Around the Sun, and then the last albums. So they kind of follow the trends of recording and mastering styles. So I think original CDs for everything through, well, I'd say everything through the Up album will sound good. They get increasingly louder and have less dynamic range, starting with Monster, but it's Reveal where that really kind of gets more of a problem. But there's not a lot of options for that, although there are now vinyl reissues that are a little bit quieter. But the recording styles had changed, so that some of that's kind of baked in. But if you want the absolute best sound fidelity, you do have a couple options. For the IRS era, I think it's original vinyl pressings all the way. I don't think anything really touches those. The original CDs are all good. They all sound good, so they're pretty close. But I still think it's original vinyl all the way for those. In terms of the original US IRS pressings, for the Warner albums. Um, Green, Out of Time, Automatic, they all sound great on their original CDs. If you can find the original vinyl pressings, they can be a little bit better in good condition with a really good setup, but it's also really great source recording. So it's kind of either or. But getting original pressings of Out of Time and really difficult. So that's, you're probably not going to be able to do that. Automatic sometimes you can find, but that's also pretty expensive. The remasters, I would really say you just get those for all the bonus contents if they have any. Monster and New Adventures, original vinyls very expensive, and the original CDs are about as good as they can be. Up's kind of the same. You can get the DVD audio discs if you can find them. Those are basically the CD masters in slightly higher resolution. Sometimes they're a little bit better. Sometimes they're about the same. Sometimes they're a little bit worse. And then Reveal Around the Sun is kind of like you try the vinyl versions to get something that's a little bit more dynamic. And then the last two albums, you have to get the vinyl out versions because the recordings are so loud to begin with, that if you don't have the vinyl versions of Accelerate and Collapse Into Now, you're just kind of stuck with ear bleeding sound. I mean, the vinyl doesn't do all that much to begin with, but at least it helps some. But yeah, that just kind of follows the trajectory of recording styles. Oh, Kevin says, as somebody who knows near zero REM, where to start on CD. Well, you could start at the beginning with Murmur, and go through chronologically. But I would basically say just get every original CD you can. Most of them are really cheap. You can find them in bargain bins, and just try as many of the albums as you'd like to, and you just kind of go from there and see which albums you prefer, and just kind of jump through. But I if you can, it's really cool to start with Chronic Town and Murmur and go all the way up through, and do their whole do all their albums in chronological order. Mike asks, "How many films do you watch in a day?" Not as many as I'd like to. I the way that I now spend my time between everyday life stuff, day job, and doing YouTube video stuff, it doesn't leave as much time for film watching as I would like. So I'm lucky if I get a couple films a week, because if I'm doing something for a review, I have to spend more time and I'm taking notes and stuff. And then I'm also looking at other format releases and comparing transfers, so it takes longer. Um, so I would say in a good week, I can average anywhere between 5 to 10 maybe. I'd love to be able to watch a movie a day, but that it usually doesn't happen. So I'm trying to cram stuff in where I can. Oh, Joe says, regarding R.E.M's two final albums, I found the Apple Music and title versions have less compression than the CD releases. That's good to know. I hadn't really tried those, but it's possible they did a new mastering. Those could really use it, so that's great to know. Ronan saying, okay, asking about my contribution on the Arrow Dollars releases. Yeah, I went over it a little bit in this stream, but basically, long story short, I just kind of sent some of the Arrow guys an email because I knew some of them from Twitter. They had sort of teased they might be doing something Leone related, and I basically just did a Hail Mary email saying, "Hey guys, if you're doing anything like this, just let me know if you need anything." So that's basically what I did. I kind of helped a little bit on the audio side of things with providing some of my audio captures for reference and things, and looking at maybe a test file or two. So nothing major. They were already pretty well underway by the time I was kind of catching wind of some of it, but they were gracious enough to actually say, "Sure, we'd love to, um, talk to you in some capacity." So that's yeah, I was just kind of like the very last guy at the end who kind of had a little contribution here and there. Bram asking what's your LD player? Yeah, it's a LX900. I've talked about it earlier in the stream and at length, but Panasonic LX900. Yeah, as Skylight points out, even non REM fans can see their most of their albums on CD in the bargain bins. They are plentiful enough that you can dig into their discography for the first time and not have to make it a big expenditure. So you can get a bunch of their albums for usually not too terribly much. And most of their albums on CD are really well mastered. So it just depends on the era you're picking up. Oh, Mateus asking about Sugarland Express. Yes, I really want to review. I would love to get the Williams score release, and then also check out the UHD, because that's in the contentious AI usage, and unfortunately Universal is starting to go downhill after they had finally gotten better, so it's not a good sign. Yes, when you make plans to watch films, as Richard Reel says, you actually end up watching less. Yes. It's much easier if you just sit down and watch something without plans. What speakers do I use? I've got all Klipsch speakers. Most of them are older, kind of more vintage, but I've basically got clipped bookshelves for all my surrounds, clipped subwoofer, and then center channel, and then I've got tower clipped mains. So none of them are super modern, but I was able to piece together a pretty nice setup by just buying vintage gear and then keeping an eye out and getting some nice local deals from, well, basically from speaker nerds who are always restoring speakers or trading speakers. Oh, Blue Canary asking, what movie do you think is most due for 4K remaster? I think Ice Station Zebra desperately needs one, being one of the big 70 mil titles. Yes, that is one that I've always meant to get the Blu-ray, but I've just never gotten around to it. It could definitely be an interesting UHD. It's one of the large format films that was shown in Cinerama as single projector. So I think all of those need a full 4K UHD royal treatment release, even though that film doesn't have it has a dedicated fan base, but it doesn't have the greatest reputation for various reasons. So but it would still be a great UHD and should happen at some point, but it would be just convincing people to, cough up the budget for doing it. Um, but in terms of what is most due for 4K new work, there's a lot. uh, Speaking of Warner, as I said before, the Wild Bunch is like the number one needs a redo. It needed a redo back when that Blu-ray came out because it's I can't even watch that Blu-ray because it just is not a pleasant experience to look at that. And yeah, that needs a complete overhaul. Do, 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 do. Yeah, Inland Empire was it's a bizarre process to look at how that was restored and retransferred and things, but it was done in a sort of way to sort of have a unique visual aesthetic in spite of all that. So that's an interesting, unique case to study. But yeah, I know I've seen the sort of flow chart of how that was done and all the steps it took, and it's just like just looking at the chart itself kind of makes your head hurt. What's your general take on HDR with older films from the black and white era, especially looking at things like how Seven Samurai was handled between BFI and Criterion? That's that's a really tough sort of discourse that I don't think has been fully ironed out yet. Different people handle it different ways. And the more we get into the HDR era, the more I'm finding that I don't like HDR for black and white in particular. I like the idea of it, and I wish there was a way to be able to utilize HDR without it somehow messing with the actual visuals and original composition. I think there have been some really good HDR presentations of black and white films. I think there have been some really bad ones, and I think there are plenty out there with major brightness issues or clipping of the black levels or messing around with the grayscale. And it just depends on, is this being done with a lot of care and attention, or is it being done kind of more of an automated way, or somewhere in between? And different studios handle it differently, different labels handle it differently, and I don't know if there's ever going to be a point at which everybody gets on the same page, but I wish they would. So I'm kind of split on it. When a black and white title has a UHD and it doesn't have HDR at first, you're kind of like, oh well, am I really getting my money's worth because it doesn't have HDR? But then also you have to look at it from a perspective of what would HDR bring to this film, and could it be done well without having pop out effects or brightness issues or black level issues? You know how, because we've had it both ways. So yeah, I'm still really split on that. But in terms of HDR and catalog titles, I'm very, very leery and picky, and if there's even a moment or an element that has something kind of pop out of the image in terms of brightness, I'm like, oh boy, oh, ow, that's a bit much. Why is the calendar on the wall now the brightest thing in the shot, even though it's in the background? Just because it's white. That's oh, that's ouch. That's it's a bit much, guys. Can we just that wasn't there. uh oh, Kevin's a fellow Clips head. Hello, sir. It's nice meeting fellow Clips fans. Your knowledge of R.E.M is astonishing. Thank you. It's a lot of nerdiness, I admit. So it's a lifetime's amount of fan nerdiness. Can I pick your brain on the tour film Blu-ray as a new remix? Love to hear what you think and about the picture quality. Well, tour film was shot in a particular way. I want to say that was 16 millimeter, so it's never gonna look super great or anything. But at least it did get a new mastering for that. But that was originally just stereo, and it sounded great for what it was. So in terms of the audio, I still would go back to the Laserdisc or the Snapper Case DVD because those had the same really great mix, and the Snapper Case DVDs were, those were some of the few DVDs that had PCM stereo. So you could get those and not have to track down the Laserdisc if you didn't want to. But for the most part, when they bundle in the sort of performance films or live films on the deluxe sets, I've found for example, like on Road Movie on the Monster set, that had a new audio remix and it was good, but it wasn't as good as the original stereo mix. So that was another one where I just still audio wise, I think the original PCM stereo is better. Yeah, that's a good idea. Mozart's Ghost talking about having the HDR container, but maybe specifically having a brightness cap or somewhere around a lower nit usage, or not going super crazy on that. Yeah, I've seen that done sometimes, and I think that's a good sort of idea to at least have when they're doing HDR, especially on black and white, because if you go over a certain amount, even if it's in only select areas, that's when there's basically like a certain threshold. If you go past that, that's when it's really too much. Oh, Philly, you got the Philly Harden got the Bruce Lee at Golden Harvest set from Arrow, and totally welled by popping in the Big Boss first. Yeah, that is a truly amazing release, especially to see all the hard work that went into it, and living with any of the previous transfers and then going to that is just it's astounding. So I'm really really hoping. I mean, I know the same amount of work ethic went into the Dollars trilogy releases, but that's what I'm hoping to see. We encounter on the upcoming UHD releases. Yes. As Evan the Movie Guy points out, people still complain that OLEDs are not bright enough, but yet you can get blinded by the brightness and the HDR usage. I know I spent so long trying to figure out what would be a good 4K television for me to get, what could I afford, and reading all the reviews and going through everything, going, oh no, it's not bright enough. It's not bright enough. And then now I deal with catalog titles having too much brightness. Just like, well, yeah, it's good thing I didn't get the absolutely brightest model that they now have in terms of televisions. They're even brighter, especially if you're looking at a Sony light cannon transfer where you feel like you need sunglasses. Let's see. Would you recommend buying a new UHD player just to be able to play Dolby Vision? Yes. In short, just yes. If you have a display that can do Dolby Vision, you should utilize that. It shouldn't be such a night and day difference, but from every disc I've looked at that has Dolby Vision and comparing it to the HDR10, the Dolby Vision version will almost always be a significant enhancement, even if it's like a Paramount disc where it's covering up some of the tomfoolery or source flaws of the master. It's seems to sort of actively not necessarily enhance, but sort of kind of fill in some of the gaps in particularly discs that are not what they should be. But also, it is usually a pretty dramatic difference in terms of visual nuance compared to a well done HDR10. Um, I think the best example would be if you have like one of the Arrow Bruce Lee discs or any of their discs where they specifically have done SDR, HDR10, and Dolby Vision and properly done each of those. If you can like borrow somebody's Dolby Vision player and then switch between the HDR10 and Dolby Vision, that will tell you if you know if you can if you're like me and you feel like there's enough of a difference. It's a pretty substantial difference. But if you feel that and on your system it's not as major of a thing, then you'll know for sure. But I would say if you're kind of on the fence, in my opinion, I think it's a major item and something that I wish everybody could actually have access to. Um, but I know not everybody will feel it's that big of an improvement. So if you can and you're on the fence, see if you can borrow a friend's player and get one of the Aero discs where they specifically mastered in all three formats, and then actually compare the same 4K master in well done HDR10 and well done Dolby Vision. Yeah, it is good to see that at least somebody, mostly being Kino, is getting the out of print Twilight Time titles back out, and also they're doing a lot of the Olive titles that are out of print. So it may take a while, but between Kino and what is it, Scorpion or Sandpiper releasing, I can never remember the name, but those are starting to leak out here and there, even if they're just the same masters on different labels. Yes, Last Boy Scout would be wonderful. That would yeah, talk about a standout demo disc title UHD. If they did that right and that got Dolby Vision, that's a Tony Scott extravaganza visually. So yeah, that would be phenomenal to see a UHD of. Blue Canary asking my thoughts on Diamonds Are Forever. Well, if you really want to hear my thoughts, I did an audio commentary because I'm not enough of a nerd already. I did commentaries for the entire original Bond series. I will defend any of the original films to the death. I love and adore all of them, even in spite of their inherent quirks and shortcomings. Personally, I think Diamonds Are Forever is extremely underrated. I think it's really more of a wicked satire of the Bond films, but it also never loses sight of the fact that it's also a Bond film at the same time. So it's really kind of operating in two different areas on multiple levels. That's because they brought in Tom Mankiewicz, and Tom Mankiewicz could do that kind of stuff. Um, it's also, I understand, not for everyone. It did take me a little while as a kid to kind of get used to it being so completely different. And then once I researched more about the production, that kind of explained some things. And then it just grew more as I grew older, and I would be able to get more of the one-liners and be able to understand more about the production, then understand why there's different tones, and then how it's sort of ebbs between the Tom Mankiewicz drafts and the Richard Maybaum drafts, and then Maybaum came back and did the final draft. So there's sort of a natural sort of development process that is reflected in the film. But I think it's a unique sort of film that doesn't always get its due in terms of people just looking at it in a particular way and like writing it off as a comedy or lighter or sort of raunchy or dated to being 70s Vegas, all the different things they'll label it as. I think it kind of gets sold short. Oh wow. I know To Live and Die in LA kind of comes and goes, but that's crazy to think that it's not streaming anywhere. So yeah, super important to have a physical media copy, but also infuriating because there isn't one without problems. So I wish I could say there was a perfect release to pick up that was in print, but unfortunately there isn't. Oh, yeah, basically explaining Never Say Never Again versus Thunderball. Yes, it is a remake of Thunderball. It's the same exact story. Long story short, because it's a very long story, Kevin McClory wound up with the rights to Thunderball and the Spectre organization after the court case over Fleming's novel of Thunderball that he wrote after the long series of treatments that developed the Thunderball story. That was the initial attempt to get a James Bond film made in the 1950s. It never fully got off the ground. And then Fleming turned it into a novel kind of without asking permission. And that led to a court case. And then Kevin McClory wound up with the rights to the story. He made a deal with Broccoli and Saltzman to make the 1965 film because they didn't want a competing production. But the stipulation was that after 10 years, McClory was free to do what he wanted with his specific rights. So 1975 rolls around and Kevin McClory pops up with the first of his never ending series of, I'm going to make a James Bond movie. Yes, it's still technically Thunderball, but I'm gonna make it anyway. And then eventually we finally got Never Say Never Again in 1983. There was a lot of legal wrangling in between, a lot of development hell, but essentially the 83 film is a remake of Thunderball, some slight tweaks and changes, some things they got away with that were kind of pulling from the Eon films, but it is basically the side unofficial one-off film that is reworking the Thunderball story for the early 1980s because it is a direct remake. And legally, that's technically all they could do was remake Thunderball. Scott Sullivan asks, "What do you think of friends and family who use their TV in the default settings?" Pain. It's a long-standing thing. I always I try to broach it politely, but it's like you see a terrible looking image and it just inside you're just like, but do how do you not see how bad the motion smoothing is? Or do you see how much you're cropping off? Or it's still in store torch mode. Like, or let me fix that for you. So usually I try to, yeah, to point a few things out, or just kinda ask, "Would you like to see what this kinda looks like a bit more calibrated?" And I try to, show a different default setting, or, show what it looks like without the contrast jacked up to 100, and turn the extra sharpness off and turn the motion smoothing off just to give people an idea. But unfortunately, there's still quite a number of people you're just never gonna convince. So it's kind of an old joke, that if somebody in the family has a television or something, I'm gonna have to be just like biting my lip because I just see like all kinds of video screwiness, and they usually just don't want to listen to me prattle on. So I'm like, okay, all right, live with bad motion smoothing, okay. Um, I have worked some in professional AV capacities here and there, or done some stuff for events. So I have on occasion been able to kind of tweak some stuff, like if they had a bunch of TVs set up somewhere and it was just running sports, but it all had terrible motion smoothing. I could be like, hey, do you guys want me to turn off all the junk processing? Because that's why it looks so bad. And then you either get, oh, yeah, we hate that stuff. Please, do you know how to turn that stuff off? Or no, we like the way it looks. And you just have to go, oh, okay. I'm gonna go now. I'm gonna try to pretend it didn't see that. Thoughts on the home video releases of Superman the movie? I find it bizarre that there hasn't been a release without a glaring flaw of some sort since 2006. Oh, it goes much further than that. I'm sorry. It's like that film is very difficult to transfer because of its because of its photographic style actually changing multiple times. Because if you think about it, the Krypton opening is shot a particular way, the Smallville scenes are shot a particular way, and the Metropolis scenes are shot a particular way. It actually changes, and each one is distinct. It's also a very grainy film, and it's a 70s film, and you're dealing with elements that are from the 70s in particular film stocks. And there were all the optical effects and all the flying shots. So there's so many variables that it's an exceptionally difficult film to transfer. If you go back to the early analog transfers, they're super noisy. They're super noisy, super grainy. They kind of have that sort of washed out look, but they seemingly did about the best they could because NTSC video is not very forgiving and rather limited. So I actually do enjoy watching the letterbox laserdisc on my setup. It's as good as it can be, but it's still obviously Superman the movie with its inherent quirks. Um, I think the best transfer it's gotten is actually the transfer of the TV cut that Warner Archive did, because that is a well done scan. There's no craziness going on. The color timing is relatively solid. The detail is good for what it is, even though it's not coming from negative materials and it's reconstructed the TV cut. But that's like the most handoff scan, and it's really well done. So ironically, I think the TV cut actually has the best looking appearance of all the cuts of Superman the movie. And the UHD has some issues, and they apparently did make a corrected version of that master, but they've never released it. And they did the box set second version of the disc and took the 70 millimeter audio off, which was the most important thing about the first pressing of the UHD. So now you got to track down that first pressing, and the only way to know is to check the actual disc itself. Um, so yeah, you have to have a variety of releases for different reasons, but the only two reasons that really explain why it's so convoluted and kind of screwy, it's a film with a heck of a lot of variables that's really difficult to transfer, number one, and the different cuts and dealing with the saw kinds and the elements being all over the world. That's all number one. Number two, and perhaps even bigger, is Warner. Warner's gonna Warner. They're gonna cut corners or try to standardize stuff, or um, not put in the extra time and effort and do the necessary research. The studio label is much more likely just gonna try and one and done something and put it out there, and it is what it is. And if it has a screwed up audio track or color issues, then so be it. That's what you get. So unfortunately, what should be the bigger problem of it being a difficult film to transfer and having all these different elements and other quirks and stuff scattered all over the world, the bigger problem is kind of the studio in charge not caring about trying to get all this stuff right. I'm glad to see other people do try to change relatives TV settings where possible. I've kind of found it's better to ask and say, try to give people an example, so that way they can see what you're talking about, because otherwise you wind up talking for 20 minutes and it sounds like gobbledygook to them. And so if I can kind of do a basic example of just toggling between, okay, here's a brief custom preset I made and see what you think. And then you just have to hope they understand what you're talking about, or they at least get what you mean and don't want it put back the way it was. Yep. The don't let him touch the TV. Yep. That's a yep. I've experienced that personally many times. Yep. Doo-doo-doo. Yeah, the early, Pan-and-Scan Laserdisc of Superman is a pretty, it can be pretty rot heavy. It's hard to get one that doesn't have at least some speckling, but I still really like the letterbox transfer that they did. Yeah, it's noisy as heck, but that was the only way you could get the 70 millimeter mix before the UHD, and, even though it was Matrix, I still love that disc. That's the version I've watched the most, actually, because that was always my go-to. Yeah, I don't know, like, the actual element history of Superman, or, like, where they actually stand now, but I do know it's a really intensive process to work on that film, because you've got all these different elements, you've got late '70s film stock, it's effects heavy, you've got the 3 different photographic styles for the 3 different acts, and you have the Salkinds being the producers, so it wasn't all done at Warner, so the elements are still, there was a ton in London. I'm sure Warner has almost everything now, but that means everything was done at different places at different times. and probably not always to the same quality standard. So you got it, and then you've got all the different cuts and all the unused materials, and there's just it's a ton of material to begin with. There's a ton of variables, so it's yeah. I'm sure there's been degradation of different bits and pieces, but yeah, I think Superman 1 and 2 need just a complete overhaul, and I wish they would, you know, go in and start from scratch and put in the level that Arrow is doing on some of these UHDs they're doing in terms of, let's figure out everything, let's leave no stone unturned. If that means we have to scan all these other bits and bobs nobody else has because we pulled out this other palette, let's do it. Let's and make sure that the effort isn't for nothing by making sure that the final end product is properly done across the board, because Warner can do a beautiful new scan and then fumble the ball at different points, and then you get a extraordinarily compromised UHD at the end of things, and then you kind of go, well, why did you do a high res scan and all this restoration work if you weren't going to make sure that the end result was a proper restoration that got everything right, and then the disc release got everything right? It kind of defeats the purpose if you don't make sure with quality control that everything makes it through 100% from start to finish. Yeah, Superman 4 is in a sort of precarious state, but Warner Archive is actually trying to find the legendary preview version. They are trying to see if that still exists somewhere. And that's why, if they can find something, I know George Feltenstein has said in podcast interviews that if they can find anything or any film elements, they will try to do a deluxe Superman 4 release, but it's just literally trying to find stuff because all they have are the raw extra scenes with the unfinished shots that's in the DVD that keeps getting recycled. So that's literally all they have at present outside of the theatrical version. A lot of companies seem to fumble the ball with restoration, sadly. Yes. Yes, that's it, you wouldn't think that it would be that difficult to make sure things made it from start to finish without some sort of problem or error, or at least catching things that were avoidable, or making sure everything was done to a certain standard. But with the way this stuff comes out, and the majority of things have some sort of quirk or issue, it seems like apparently that's asking too much. And then you start to wonder, well, if you're going to do this kind of work, then why wouldn't you make sure to try and get it right? Yeah, it might take a little extra time, but that's the job. It's kind of the point. But again, I guess it's asking too much. Let's see. If Superman 4 is distributed internationally by Canon, how come the 93-minute version is released in Germany and Japan? It's I think with Quest for Peace, it's the actual international distribution is a little bit different, and then the slightly extended Japanese version was done as like a particular custom form because some of the deleted materials made it out in certain versions internationally. So there obviously are materials out there somewhere, but you're still only going to be able to maybe reconstruct like the slightly longer Japanese version. But it seems like something's doable. One just has to actually find the materials to be able to do it. As Josh says, yes, if Arrow did a UHD set or release of Superman, it would be great. Oh, I see. Making a point about waiting 6 months for the inevitable replacement disc. Yeah, they do have issues like everybody does. I know they're definitely a bit slower on doing replacement discs than others are, but I've not run into an issue with that as of yet. But I know I think it has something to do with how they got bought out a couple years ago, and so now like they're maybe structured a little bit differently. But yeah, I mean mistakes do happen. It's just how do you address it? how do you handle it? How do you do it in a relatively timely fashion within your means and budget? Hopefully, it's you know done and consumers feel like it's addressed within a timely manner. But everybody does it differently, and then there are some things that are never corrected, or some things that we never see the replacement that we were going to supposedly get. Like, well, the one that springs to mind, Warner Archive was supposed to reissue Val Luton's The Ghost Ship, the part of the masterpiece Luton cycle, because the automated grain removal took out the moth in the opening of the film. Yes, it's something very small, but it's a key moment. And they announced that they were going to do a disc replacement to get that back in there, but that never happened. So yeah. Although apparently the British Blu-ray release of the same master is the corrected version, so I gotta import the British version to get the moth back. So, yeah, sometimes those don't happen, unfortunately. Let's see, what's the best version of Death Wish? The Kino UHD, the Japanese Blu-ray, or the Warner Blu-ray? That's a sticky wicket right there. I'm gonna do a review of the Kino UHD, and I've heard of the Japanese Blu-ray, but I've never owned it. And then the old Warner Master and the old DVD is well, no, I guess technically, well, yeah, it was the old DVD, and then the Warner Blu-ray. They all have issues of their own. The audio especially has been really hit with processing over the years. And then the color timing can really vary. So Death Wish is one of those films where I think you have to just look at some comparisons and then try to figure out which one you're most happy with. And I don't know as of yet which one technically is the most accurate, or I would be the most happy with. I do have issues with the Kino UHD, and I'm trying to see if I can find a pre DVD copy that has decent audio to compare that as well, because the audio itself has been handled a variety of different ways. Yeah, as Don't points out, Oliver Harper talking about Superman the movie having a different version and then not having it released. What he was referring to is what I was saying, that Warner did make a version 1.5, or a corrected version of their 4K master that's on the UHD, but instead of putting that updated version on the second UHD release for the box set, they just reissued the first UHD with the issues, and then took off the 70 millimeter audio, which was the most important part of that disc. So they they almost just reissued the same disc. They just made it significantly worse by doing so. So yeah, that's a typical Warner's gonna Warner move right there. So yeah, technically somewhere sitting on a shelf, there's like a hard drive with the updated version of Superman the movie's 4K master with some corrections. It's never been released. Who knows if it will ever be released? So yeah, that's not helpful. Well, I just realized I have cracked 3 hours now in runtime, so I'm gonna start winding it down. I'm trying to make these a little bit more manageable, especially because if you do one of these live streams after once you hit about 3 hours, your throat starts to get a little bit dry at least. So I just want to say thanks for everybody popping in, and hopefully this has been a fun physical media chat, and just I wanted to check in with everybody, and also to once again say thank you ever so much for following me on this channel, and liking videos, and leaving comments, and giving me feedback, and deciding to subscribe, because I made a point of at the start never once asking for any of that, or doing the calls to action, even though that's how you're always told you're supposed to do YouTube videos. And yes, it's very helpful, but I personally prefer it when YouTube creators don't do that. I like to subscribe because I want to. And so I wanted to do the same if I started a channel. So that means that everybody who, jumps on a live stream that I do, or clicks like on a video, or decides to subscribe to this channel, does so because they want to, and that they obviously get something out of what I'm putting together. And so that really does mean the world, and it makes each subscription, each subscriber, all the more important, because I consciously decided not to ever ask anybody to subscribe. So even though it's just 10,000, and in the realm of YouTube, that's not a super large amount, it's really big for me because I never expected to get anybody to subscribe to the channel. I simply did this because I needed some sort of outlet, and I started doing reviews because I couldn't find reviews that covered the material that I thought was important, or was looking for. So I'm just thrilled that people actually get something out of this outlet that I sort of started for myself. And um, just unbelievably grateful for all the feedback I've received. And so this is just something I wanted to do for this milestone, and kind of again just check in with everybody and just have a nice physical media chat. So um, I never thought I'd get here to 10,000. So this is really lovely. Yeah, it at least is some level of vindication. Makes me feel a little bit better for all the time I've sunk into doing all these videos and such. As I've said, I've got several videos in various stages in the pipeline that I've already recorded and have edited, or am in the process of editing. And so hopefully in the next week to 2 weeks, I should have uploaded the next couple of reviews. I've got some Laserdisc videos. I've finished the book review of From Russia with Love, continuing with the other book series reviews I'm doing, and then the La La Land score releases of the Bond scores, plus my best and worst of 2024 awards videos, and then hopefully I'll then have the reviews of North by Northwest and The Searchers, and then followed by The Great Escape and Laurel and Hardy sets, and then at least the first part of my Capper box set review, because at first I thought I could get it done in 2 videos, and then when I finished recording the first video, I realized I had only done the introduction and the silent film. So it's going to be at least 3, possibly 4 videos, because I want to make sure and cover everything properly. And I think that's the reason why there haven't been other major reviews of that set, because it is so substantial, and it takes time to go through that whole set properly, and then to review it properly. It takes time. So that'll be just kind of sprinkled in. So that's what I've got in the sort of near future of what you should see on this channel in the next month to month and a half or so. And I just basically I try to get each video done as soon as possible, and as soon as I can get something finished, edited, uploaded, I just go ahead and make that public. So I don't have a set schedule. It's just basically as soon as I can get something completed, I upload it, and then I spend too long making my silly thumbnails and doing the description and everything. But as soon as I can get stuff done, I put it out there. So yeah, I want to say again, thanks to everybody. I hope you've had fun kind of hanging out and chatting about physical media and such. And I truly appreciate everybody in here tonight, and all the thank yous and such. It really means a lot. So thanks everybody, and hopefully I'll be able to do another live stream relatively soon, and then I'll be doing some premieres for things like the Disc Awards and some of the other reviews. So stay tuned for that. I'll post information about it before it happens, so you can jump in the premiere chat if you want to. So as always, definitely keep supporting both studios and boutique label releases by buying films on disc in order to help keep both physical media and film culture alive. And as always, thank you ever so much, everyone. Thank you ever so much for watching and supporting this channel. And until next time, have a better one.